Hey guys. Tonight, we begin with the wonderfully unhinged universe of Victorian etiquette. The set of rules your ancestors invented while wearing collars so tight they probably affected their judgment. You step into a world where people fear ankles, measure virtue by teaspoons, and believe the correct placement of a doily can prevent societal collapse. It is the birthplace of many strange habits we still follow today, even though none of us remember why. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help. Little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. Victorian London rises around you in a cloud of soot and self-importance. The streets hum with carriages, chimneys, wheeze like asthmatic dragons, and every person you pass looks like they have memorized a rule book thicker than a family Bible. You step onto a cobblestone street and instantly feel watched, not by the people, but by the etiquette itself. It waits in the fog like a judgmental ghost, ready to scold. You for standing incorrectly. You have barely taken 3 steps before someone tuts at the angle of your elbows, which apparently communicate moral decay if bent too casually. The city believes its rules keep society upright, even though half the population is hunched under starched collars, stiff, enough to serve as emergency armor. You watch a woman glide past, lifting her skirt exactly 3 inches from the mud, never 4, because 4 inches suggests you crave chaos. A man tips his hat with such rigid choreography that he resembles a malfunctioning automaton. A child bows to a dog, because the dog belongs to a duchess and therefore outranks him. Every gesture, every breath, every blink seems governed by a code invented by people who clearly did not trust humanity to behave without 30 layers of instruction. It does not take long to realize the rules are less about politeness and more about survival in a society addicted to judgment. You step into a tea shop thinking you will escape the madness, but the ritual only intensifies. The moment you touch the door handle, an elderly woman gasps as though you have committed a sin worthy of public execution. You turned the handle clockwise instead of counterclockwise. No one tells you why this matters. It simply does. The customers sip tea with the posture of condemned saints, each terrified that a single clink of a spoon will brand them as socially unstable. You sit, carefully, and immediately, a server materializes to tell you your left ankle is showing exactly 1/4 inch too boldly. You adjust, though you have no idea how ankles became dangerous. As you observe them, you begin to understand Victorian logic. If life is filled with plagues, early death, and the odd exploding boiler, then controlling how people pour tea probably feels like reclaiming power. People cling to etiquette the way sailors cling to floating debris. They cannot control the mortality rate, but they can control whether you fold your napkin diagonally or horizontally. You realize that half of the pointless habits you follow today began because someone in 19th century London could not handle unpredictability. Outside again, you find a group of gentlemen discussing the weather with the intensity of philosophers debating the meaning of existence. Weather conversation is a safe topic, which is Victorian for boring enough to be socially acceptable. One of them says the air feels damp, and the others nod as though he has delivered the wisdom of the ages. You suddenly understand why small talk survived into the modern era. Victorians perfected it as a method of communication that revealed nothing, risked nothing, and kept everyone from panicking about the deeper issues like debt, romance, or the fact that half the city smells faintly of horse. Down the street, a policeman directs you around a puddle, not because it is deep, but because stepping into it violates a rule regarding street cleanliness. The city itself tries to follow these rules, but London is London. The puddle is probably older than some members of Parliament. You obey anyway. Surprisingly, it feels natural. Some part of you slips into these habits as though they were tucked into your genetic memory by anxious ancestors. You wander farther until you reach a row of townhouses, each painted the same somber shade of brown. A woman opens her door just wide enough to place a calling card on a tray. She flicks her wrist with precision. The card must lie at a perfect angle, or it signals hidden disrespect. You watch her close the door again, confident that she has maintained social order for another day. Calling cards will later evolve into business cards, and you begin to see how these Victorian habits infiltrated modern life. You exchange cards now for the same reason they did then. To say, I exist, and I am not a threat. Please treat me kindly. The city swallows you in sound and ritual. You pass a man who stops walking entirely to let a lady cross his path because the rulebook insists women must never navigate around men. The woman nods politely while clearly wishing she did not have to perform such a time-consuming dance just to get to the bakery. You recognize the same instinct in modern elevator etiquette when everyone pretends to be performing a choreographed routine of stepping aside, stepping forward, and awkwardly looking at the door. By the time the lamps flicker on and the fog settles low, you realize you have been following Victorian rules without meaning to. Your posture straightens, your steps shorten. You even adjust your breathing to appear more refined. Some rules were made in fear, some in vanity, and some simply because someone with too much lace and not enough hobbies declared it must be so. They cling to you, passed down like heirlooms no one asked to inherit, urging you to act proper long after the reason has evaporated in the London smog. You discover quickly that in Victorian London, the real danger is not crime or illness, or even stepping into something unspeakable on the street. The real threat is greeting someone incorrectly. You walk into a drawing room and instantly feel the tension thicken, as if everyone inside has collectively decided this moment will define your entire social worth. Every person stands poised like an overwound clock, waiting for you to choose the exact greeting that prevents the collapse of civilization. A bow that is too deep signals desperation. A bow that is too shallow suggests arrogance. A handshake offered too soon borders on scandal. A handshake offered too late implies you question their hygiene, which given Victorian hygiene is fair, but socially unforgivable. Even the angle of your chin is a political statement. Raise it too high, and you appear proud. Tilt it too low, and you look subservient. Keep it level, and you risk seeming emotionally neutral, which Victorians distrust even more. Someone approaches you, a man embroidered in more fabric than a modern sofa, and expects a greeting. You freeze. Your instincts tell you to wave, a normal modern gesture. But here a wave can mean anything from polite acknowledgement to, I challenge you to duel, depending on the wiggle of the fingers. The man narrows his eyes, waiting. You attempt a small nod, which in this era can mean hello, farewell, I respect you, or please leave, depending on atmospheric pressure and the density of your moral character. It becomes clear that greetings are not just greetings, they are delicate negotiations written in invisible ink. Victorians fear improper greetings because these small interactions control the fragile balance of their world. Every gesture must confirm that someone knows their place in the social ladder, and the ladder has more rungs than a ship's rigging. One misplaced greeting, and you risk insulting someone's ancestry, wealth, career, or hat size. You watch two ladies greet each other on the street, and the ritual looks like a military exercise disguised as politeness. One raises her hand to her collar, the other tilts her head. Both smile with precisely measured enthusiasm. They exchange pleasantries so gentle they barely disturb the air. Underneath that softness lies the tension of two people evaluating each other's tone, grammar, breath, and posture. They part ways smiling, relieved they both survived. The fear runs so deep that people rehearse greetings beforehand. Families practice bowing in their parlors like actors terrified of improvisation. Young men repeat phrases in mirrors to ensure they sound charming rather than alarming. Even children are taught how to greet adults with the exact amount of purity expected of tiny humans shaped entirely by rules. You begin to see how this fear survived into the present day. You still hesitate before greeting strangers. You still worry about shaking hands for too long or too short. You still wonder whether to hug someone or not, silently praying they make the choice first. Victorians perfected that fear and passed it down to you like an antique vase you never wanted but are terrified to drop. Back in the drawing room, a woman approaches. She smiles with the tightness of someone prepared to faint if you misuse a single vowel. She expects the proper greeting for her rank, her age, her marital status, and possibly the alignment of Mercury. You inhale. You perform a polite nod combined with a soft smile, the safest hybrid you can invent. Her face brightens. You have succeeded, or at least you have not caused a social earthquake. As the conversation continues, you begin to relax, but then you notice the group watching from across the room. They analyze every move you make, filing away your greeting in their mental ledgers. In this world, a greeting is the opening line of your biography. You sense that some of your modern habits echo theirs. You still say, "Nice to meet you," even when the meeting is not nice at all. You still worry that your tone might offend someone. You still practice polite scripts because raw honesty remains too unpredictable. This city teaches you that greetings are the hinges of society. They swing open silently, but if mishandled, they creak loudly enough to haunt you. Victorians feared improper greetings because they believed every interaction could tilt their reputation, and that fear lingers in you as you leave the room, still mindful of how you greet the next person who steps into your path. You wander through Victorian London and quickly learn that hats are not clothing. They are declarations. They are moral compasses. They are tiny portable monuments to your character. You think you understand hats because you own one, but this place treats them the way priests treat relics. Every hat carries meaning, and every motion involving a hat carries even more. You see a man remove his hat at the exact moment a lady walks past, but he does it so slowly, you wonder if he is trying to preserve the dignity of the hat, the lady, or perhaps the air around both of them. The lady barely glances at him, yet the motion is treated like a formal handshake between two strangers, mediated by fabric. Then another man fails to remove his hat in time. The collective gasp that follows is loud enough to scare a flock of pigeons into early retirement. People stop mid-stride, staring at him as if he has committed a felony against society. He notices too late. He grabs the brim, yanks the hat off his head, and bows to no one in particular. The damage is done. Somewhere, in an unseen corner of the social universe, a ledger updates itself and marks him as slightly uncultured. Hats here have rules that feel like they were invented during a moment of collective delirium. You must remove your hat indoors unless you are in a hallway, in which case it depends on the type of hallway, the quality of the lighting, and whether a widow is present. You must remove your hat in the presence of a lady, unless she is a relative, in which case it depends on her age, status, and whether she owns lace. You must remove your hat during a greeting, but only after the other person has acknowledged you, unless you are greeting someone significantly older, in which case you remove the hat first to show respect, unless that person is of lower social standing than you, in which case removing your hat first is seen as weakness. You realize that hats are not accessories. They are miniature social contracts that must be activated in the correct order. The most impressive ritual occurs outside a church where a gentleman performs what looks like a spiritual dance involving his hat. He lifts it, pauses, rotates it slightly, presses it to his chest, and puts it back on again. You assume he is summoning a saint, but no. He is greeting a bishop while simultaneously showing deference to the building. Even he looks exhausted afterward. You ask a shopkeeper why hats matter so much, and she blinks at you as if you have asked why humans breathe air. She tells you that hats separate the polite from the uncivilized. Without hats, she claims, society would collapse into chaos. You picture people running through the streets, screaming simply because their heads are uncovered. In this world, it seems plausible. As you walk, you notice how the habit begins to seep into you. You find yourself reaching for your head every time someone approaches. Even though you are not wearing a hat, your hand lifts instinctively, as though trying to mimic a gesture it has inherited from the environment. You watch others do the same, their hands rising automatically with the muscle memory of a culture terrified of appearing disrespectful. This ritual sticks with you long after you leave Victorian London. You still remove your hat when entering a building, even though no one remembers why. Somewhere deep in collective memory lives the echo of an age when failing to lift your hat could spark gossip, ruin friendships, or condemn you to the social wilderness. You still do it out of instinct, a habit inherited from ancestors who walked through fog-filled streets terrified of misjudging the correct angle of a brim. You realize the ritual survived not because the rule remained meaningful, but because the action felt polite enough to persist. A gesture that once protected reputations now lives on, without purpose. A tiny relic of a world where hats governed morality. And as you picture the Victorians around you lifting and lowering their hats with operatic seriousness, you understand how such a small motion became a permanent part of your own life. You sit down in a Victorian parlor and instantly understand that sitting is not a physical act here. It is a performance, a statement, a confession of your character delivered through the angle of your spine. The chair beneath you is beautiful and deeply uncomfortable, designed by someone who clearly wanted to discourage relaxation. A moment your hips touch the cushion, 3 different people glance at you as if measuring your moral worth by how much of your back contacts the chair. Slouch even slightly, and you sense the room preparing to exile you from civilization. Victorians believe posture reveals the soul. A straight spine means discipline, virtue, and a life without scandal. A crooked spine means laziness, corruption, and perhaps criminal intent. You watch a young woman sit with such perfect alignment that she could balance a chandelier on her head. Her neck barely moves when she speaks. Her hands rest in her lap as if any sudden motion might offend the upholstery. She maintains this pose for an entire conversation about embroidery, which may explain why so many Victorians aged as though their joints were permanently locked in place. Across the room, a gentleman lowers himself into a chair with ceremonial precision. He grips the armrests as if descending into a throne of destiny. His back remains straight, his shoulders squared, his eyes alert. You notice he is sweating from the effort of appearing effortlessly dignified. Victorians train for posture the way soldiers train for battle. Mothers correct children's backs as fiercely as generals correct marching lines. If your spine bends without permission, someone will gasp, adjust you, or insist on strapping a device to your torso that looks suspiciously like a torturer's prototype. You shift slightly, and a woman beside you inhales, sharply. Her fan freezes in midair. You have committed a mild posture crime. You try to correct yourself, but the chair has its own opinion. It forces your shoulders back so aggressively, you wonder if it is trying to fuse with your skeleton. You hold the pose and feel your muscles vibrate with the strain. Victorian chairs are not built for comfort. They are built for moral guidance. Soft chairs, after all, encourage lounging, and lounging encourages thoughts, and thoughts encourage rebellion. The safest citizens are upright ones. A hostess enters and surveys the room like a posture inspector, checking the alignment of her guests. She glides between chairs, ensuring no one leans too far back. Leaning, she believes, is a slippery slope toward losing control of one's impulses. She corrects a man whose elbow drifts lazily toward the armrest, guiding his limb as though repositioning a fragile statue. He thanks her as if she has saved him from disgrace. In this era, posture is not convenience. It is a choreographed expression of moral strength. You begin to understand why this obsession survived. Even now you hear echoes of Victorian posture rules. Sit up straight. Do not slouch. Do not rest your elbows on the table. Shoulders back. Chin level. These phrases trail you through childhood like polite ghosts from the 19th century. The Victorians created these rules because they believed the body mirrored the mind. A collapsed spine meant collapsed principles. A relaxed posture meant relaxed discipline. They feared that if people grew comfortable, society might unravel stitch by stitch until everyone was lounging in moral chaos. You try sitting differently, letting your shoulders lower for a moment of relief, but you instantly feel exposed, as if sinking into the Jenna chair might start a scandal. The Victorians around you sit like mannequins with anxiety, terrified that a single slip in posture will be noticed, judged, whispered about behind fabric fans. Their fear becomes contagious. You straighten again without thinking. Your spine rises like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. A footman walks by carrying a tray of tea, and even he maintains perfect posture, his back straighter than the legs of the tray he holds. His training shows in every movement. Posture for him is not just etiquette, it is employment. Bend incorrectly, and he risks losing his process, uniform, his wages, and his future. The working class is trained to sit and stand with mechanical precision because any sign of bodily fatigue is mistaken for moral weakness. By the time you stand to leave, you feel as though your bones have been pressed into new shapes. Stepping outside, the air feels softer, forgiving, human. Yet you catch yourself straightening your back again, an involuntary salute to a long-vanished era. Victorian posture has seeped into you, surviving the centuries through family scoldings, school teachers, and your own unconscious habits. It lingers because the Victorians believed that a straight back proved you were in control of yourself. And even now, long after their rules dissolved into history, you still feel the echo of that belief every time you sit down and instinctively lift your spine. You stand in the entry hall of a Victorian townhouse, surrounded by marble floors, heavy drapery, and a silence so thick you feel the air judging you. A footman appears with the seriousness of someone guarding a royal vault. He offers you a silver tray, and on it lies the most powerful object in the entire house, a small rectangle of cardstock, a calling card. You stare at it, confused, but he watches you like this is the moment that will reveal whether you belong to polite society or the wilds beyond London, where people speak plainly and sit in chairs without anxiety. The calling card is deceptively simple. Your name sits in looping, script, trembling with importance. You whisper that surely this cannot matter so much, but the footman stiffens, as though you have insulted a sacred ritual. In Victorian London, the calling card is not a convenience. It is identity, reputation, intention, and social strategy condensed into a few inches of paper. It tells people who you are before you speak, and more importantly, whether you're worth speaking to at all. You watch a lady arrive and place her card delicately on the tray. The gesture is so exact it resembles a spell. She positions it at a perfect angle, neither too assertive nor too meek, and the footman nods with solemn approval. Her card will be carried to the mistress of the house, who will study it like a coded message. If the corners are bent, it means something. If the handwriting is bold, it means something. If the ink is too dark, it means something. Victorians have created an entire emotional universe from paper thickness and typography. Some cards are engraved with gold, glittering like tiny declarations of superiority. Others are plain because modesty is fashionable among the wealthy, but only if the modesty is expensive. Some contain full names, some only initials. Some include titles that stretch across the card like a bragging contest. You begin to realize that calling cards are their version of curated identity, a Victorian profile page delivered by footmen. You step back and observe how everyone interacts with this ritual. People spend hours choosing fonts as if fonts determine destiny. They order cards by the hundreds because every visit requires one. A card left at a door signals affection, respect, obligation, or the desire to be left alone depending on the situation. A card folded at the corner conveys condolences. A card, delivered in person but not handed directly, signals politeness without enthusiasm. Each variation is a subtle message in a city built on quiet codes. It becomes painfully clear how much of modern behavior still echoes this. You exchange business cards today with the same stiff smile Victorians used, pretending the paper is a simple convenience when it is really a delicate invitation. You send messages online and worry about the tone, the timing, the impression. You follow the same instinct that Victorians had when they dropped cards at doorsteps, hoping someone will interpret the gesture correctly. In Victorian London, calling cards are your social armor. Without one, you are invisible, and being invisible in this world is worse than being disliked. A polite rejection comes when the servants return your card on a tray, signaling you are no longer part of the social loop. It is swift, elegant, and devastating. The Victorians have mastered the art of ending relationships without words, a skill that survives today through unread messages, polite silences, and calendar invitations that mysteriously never arrive. You are invited to participate, so you take the tray. You place your card on it, trying to mirror the practiced ease of the others. Your hand trembles slightly, but the footman nods, acknowledging your effort. The card disappears into the house, carried with ceremonial gravity. You imagine the mistress examining it, searching for clues in the ink, the edges, the weight. You have put your identity in her hands, hoping she receives it as intended. As you wait, your thoughts drift to the present. You realize you still perform these rituals, only with different tools. You curate profiles. You send greeting texts. You handle introductions through small digital rectangles that hold more power than they should. The same anxiety lingers beneath every exchange. Will they respond? Will they ignore you? Will they read too much into your timing? The Victorians may have vanished, but their calling cards linger in your habits like faint perfume in old fabric. A servant returns. He carries your card, but this time he carries another with it. The mistress has accepted your greeting. The ritual has worked. He hands you the paired cards with the gravity of a treaty. And as you step back into the London fog, you realize that even now, in your own world, introductions still feel like this. A negotiation of identity. A tiny moment where people decide how to treat you. Victorian calling cards never disappeared. They merely changed shape. You step into a Victorian sitting room and realize almost immediately that no one here is speaking to communicate. They are speaking to survive. The air is thick, with polite words arranged like decorative wallpaper, carefully chosen to cover the walls of silence without revealing anything beneath. A gentleman near the fireplace discusses the temperature as if the weather were a complex scientific puzzle. A lady responds with a measured observation about the sky, delivered with the same tone one might use to identify a rare species of bird. Their eyes reveal nothing, their posture reveals nothing, and their sentences feel like they have been pre-approved by a committee dedicated to preventing emotional accidents. You join a small cluster of guests who all seem to be circling the same topic with the precision of carriages navigating a narrow street. They talk about the day being pleasant, although none of them seem particularly convinced. They nod at each other with the quiet desperation of people who would rather swallow a teaspoon of soot than reveal a single personal truth. You quickly understand that Victorian society has strict rules about conversation. Genuine topics are dangerous, Real feelings are wild creatures that must be caged. Opinions are to be trimmed, starched, and made so. Inoffensive, they cannot possibly brush against anyone's sensibilities. Someone turns to you. You can feel their relief at having a fresh target for small talk, as if you have arrived to rescue them from the threat of meaningful dialogue. They ask how your walkover was. You say it was fine. They nod with exaggerated appreciation, as though you have just shared a profound insight. They follow up with a comment about the cobblestones, then the breeze, then the upcoming season. Each sentence a stepping stone across the river of actual human connection. You hop along with them, aware that one misplaced remark could send you both splashing into the forbidden waters of honesty. You begin to see how small talk became a Victorian survival tactic. In a world obsessed with reputation, where one careless comment can spread through parlors faster than a spark through dry fields, people learn to speak without saying anything. They cushion their thoughts in layers of politeness so thick that even their compliments feel shrink-wrapped. This entire social dance exists to prevent offense, scandal, misunderstanding, or the dreaded possibility that someone might discover who you truly are. Across the room, a pair of gentlemen engage in the most intense conversation you have heard yet. They speak about the possibility of rain on Tuesday. One man claims his joints predicted. The other counters with a theory about cloud formations. Their expressions are solemn, as if discussing matters of war. But it is all performance. They are not exchanging knowledge, they are exchanging safety. This is conversation stripped down to its bare essentials, designed to keep everyone comfortable and no one exposed. A young woman attempts to introduce a slightly more daring topic, mentioning a book she has read. Three heads turn sharply in her direction, as if she has said something indecent. Books can lead to ideas, and ideas can lead to opinions, and opinions are a social minefield. She quickly corrects herself, offering instead a pleasant remark about the cover of the book, which is decorative and therefore safe. The group relaxes again, relieved to return to the predictable rhythms of meaningless chatter. You recognize the same patterns in your own time. You ask coworkers how their weekend was, knowing the details do not matter. You comment on traffic, on the temperature, inside a building, on how fast time seems to be passing lately. You fill silence with words that are not meant to reveal anything. Somewhere, deep in the residue of Victorian anxieties, lives the belief that small talk is the buffer between you and potential social chaos. As the evening unfolds, you participate more easily. You discuss the curtains, the tea, the quality of the candles, and the pace of horses on the street. You speak in gentle circles like everyone else, layering your words with safety until you barely notice you are saying nothing at all. The room hums with agreeable emptiness, and you start to see why the Victorians devoted themselves to this art. It protects them. It protects you. It keeps the peace in a world terrified of disruption. Before you leave, someone thanks you for the lovely conversation. You realize they mean it. In this society, a pleasant exchange of harmless phrases is not a failure. It is success. It is a sign that no one was offended, startled, challenged, or allowed too close. And as you step back into the London night, you feel that strange Victorian instinct settle into your bones, that quiet pull toward polite topics, toward surface-level warmth, toward the small talk that still lives in your everyday speech without you even noticing. You walk into a Victorian parlor and instantly feel the atmosphere tighten, as though the room has lungs of its own and they have just inhaled. People glance at you, then look away so quickly it feels choreographed. You soon learn that here the most dangerous weapon anyone possesses is their eyes. A glance can uplift someone. A longer glance can hint at affection. Anything beyond that risks igniting full-scale scandal. Victorians treat eye contact the way you might treat an open flame. Beautiful from a distance, hazardous up close. A gentleman near the pianoforte speaks to a lady without ever looking directly at her. His gaze drifts upward to the chandelier, then downward to the carpet, then briefly toward her chin. Never her eyes. It is like watching two actors perform an entire scene while refusing to acknowledge each other's existence. The lady nods politely, her eyes occasionally flickering toward him before darting away as if she has glimpsed something indecent. You expect them to trip over the furniture considering how carefully they avoid each other's faces. But no, Victorians have perfected this skill. They can navigate entire conversations like bats using sonar, all while pretending their eyesight is too shy to function. A hostess pulls you aside with the urgency of someone preventing an international incident. She warns you to be mindful of your gaze, because here the eyes reveal everything people are not supposed to say aloud. Hold someone's gaze too long, and you imply interest. Hold it longer, and you imply intention. Hold it even a heartbeat more, and there will be whispers by morning. In this era, even a glance is a kind of trouble. It is safer to look at a person's hat, or the wallpaper behind them, or the general area of their left ear. Anything direct is a confession. You try to participate without accidentally scandalizing the entire neighborhood. You speak to a gentleman about horses while keeping your eyes pleasantly unfocused, hovering somewhere around the area between his forehead and the air above it. He seems relieved. He even compliments you on your pleasant conversational manner, which confuses you since you said very little. Then you realize he means your face, or rather, your choice not to. Point your face directly at his. In a society terrified of revealing emotion, this counts as charm. Across the room, a young couple accidentally meets each other's gaze for longer than a polite second. A tiny shock ripples through the guests, subtle but unmistakable. A woman drops her fan. A man coughs so loudly he nearly falls out of his chair. Someone whispers something about impropriety. The couple looks away instantly, both pretending to admire the same wallpaper pattern in opposite directions. But it is too late. That brief flicker of eye contact has already placed them under social surveillance. Tomorrow their acquaintances will casually inquire about their relationship, and they will swear they barely know each other, which is technically true because neither of them actually looked at the other. You begin to understand the Victorian fear. Eye contact is honest. It reveals too much. A long look can betray desire, frustration, amusement, boredom, or the simple fact that your thoughts have momentarily escaped the rigid boundaries of propriety. In an age where reputations are as fragile as glass, even a glance can crack the surface. You notice how much of this survives inside you now. You still worry about looking at strangers for too long. You still sense when someone's gaze lingers, and you are not sure how to interpret it. You still break eye contact during conversations, not because it is uncomfortable, but because some small inherited instinct whispers that you should. The Victorians perfected the delicate art of almost meeting someone's eyes, just enough to be polite, but not enough to cross an invisible moral line. As the evening winds down, you attempt one last conversation. You focus on the bridge of the person's nose, the safest place to anchor your attention without actually locking eyes. They smile, pleased with your discretion. You smile back, careful to direct it at the general atmosphere. And as you leave the room, you realize that this strange, stiff dance of glances has followed you into the modern world, shaping the subtle ways you look at others without you ever noticing. You stand in a Victorian doorway and realize too late that someone is approaching you with a purpose. He extends his hand, slow and deliberate, like a man offering a treaty between nations. You prepare to shake it, thinking this will be simple. The way shaking hands has always been simple in your world. But the moment your fingers touch his glove, the energy of the room shifts. The other guests tilt their heads, watching with the fascination of people witnessing a high-stakes negotiation disguised as politeness. Nothing in this era is simple, least of all a handshake. The gentleman squeezes once, not too firm, not too soft, with a precision that feels rehearsed. You return the squeeze, but you feel him subtly adjust, testing your intention, your confidence, your upbringing. Victorians believe the handshake is the mirror of the soul. Too strong and you are aggressive. Too weak and you are weak in spirit. Too long and you are inappropriate. Too short and you are dismissive. Even the angle of your wrist matters. A downward tilt implies dominance. An upward tilt implies humility. A perfectly level handshake implies you have studied the art with the seriousness of a scholar. You try to withdraw your hand. He refuses for a second longer than expected, signaling that he respects you but also outranks you. The message is clear despite neither of you saying a single word. Victorians have turned the handshake into a full language, complete with grammar, tone, and subtext. It is astonishing and also exhausting. Nearby, a woman explains the rules to a child who is barely tall enough to see over the table. She teaches him how to position his thumb, how to match pressure, how to release with elegance. Her instructions sound like preparation for an exam that determines his social future. She warns him never to shake hands with both hands unless he intends to communicate extreme warmth, which must be used sparingly, like rare spices. Too warm, a handshake can signal desperation or affection, or a scandal waiting to bloom. The child nods solemnly. Even he looks terrified of getting it wrong. You watch another pair greet one another with a handshake so delicate it resembles two butterflies touching wings. Then a pair of businessmen collide with handshakes so firm you can hear the crack of knuckles across the room. Each style communicates rank, familiarity, or subtle challenge. You begin to see why Victorians loved these rituals. In a society where words are heavily monitored, handshakes allow people to express truths they cannot safely speak. At one point, you accidentally offer your hand to someone of significantly higher status without waiting for them to offer theirs first. The temperature in the room drops. A woman gasps into her glove. A man coughs violently, trying to distract from your mistake. You quickly pull your hand back, pretending you were simply adjusting your sleeve, even though your sleeve was perfectly fine. The gentleman you nearly insulted smiles thinly, the kind of smile that says he will be telling this story for months. You wonder why this ritual survived into your own century, long after corsets and calling cards faded into history. Yet you still shake hands, without understanding why. You greet strangers with a gesture older than electricity, one that persists because the Victorians embedded meaning so deeply into it that the habit became instinct. Even now you judge someone slightly based on the firmness of their handshake, even if you claim you do not. The echoes of Victorian anxieties live quietly in your fingers. A man approaches with a handshake so perfectly executed that it feels like a balm after the earlier chaos. He grips your hand with steady confidence, releases at the exact right moment, and gives a gentle nod. The gesture is simple but sincere, free from all the social calculus swirling through the room. For a second, you feel something rare here, authenticity. Then he walks away, and you realize even that moment was choreographed by centuries of rules, refined and rehearsed until sincerity itself has a script. You leave the parlor and find yourself still thinking about the way your fingers curled, the angle of your wrist, the pressure you applied. The handshake lingers in your body like muscle memory, inherited from ancestors who feared that every greeting was a test. And as you step into the London street, you know the truth. You will keep shaking hands for the rest of your life. Not because it makes sense, but because someone in the 19th century decided it revealed your character, and the world never stopped believing them. You slip your hands into a pair of Victorian gloves, and instantly to feel as though you have been issued a concealed weapon made of stitched leather and quiet judgment. The fabric clings to your fingers with a precision that suggests gloves are not mere accessories here. They are extensions of your identity, your morals, your reputation, and perhaps your willingness to silently duel someone who stands too close. The moment you tug them on, you sense the shift in your posture. Victorians treat gloves the way modern people treat passwords. Without them, you are exposed, vulnerable, and socially naked. You walk down a narrow London street where everyone seems to be wearing gloves thick enough to survive a minor sword fight. Men in tailored coats lift the brims of their hats with gloved fingertips, revealing that bare skin is allowed only in emergencies. Women glide by in gloves that rise nearly to their elbows, turning their arms into ceremonial objects, meant to be admired but never touched. Even children wear gloves, tiny versions that make them look like miniature diplomats negotiating the terms of recess. Inside a drawing room, you discover the true severity of glove etiquette. A hostess greets you warmly, but her eyes flick instantly to your pretty tin gloves. She studies the stitching, the color, the fit, deciding within a heartbeat whether you are respectable or merely pretending. You had no idea gloves could carry so much information, but here they function like detailed resumes. Good gloves mean good breeding. Scuffed gloves suggest questionable character. No gloves at all mean you are either reckless or foreign. A gentleman removes his gloves with the slow precision of someone diffusing an emotional bomb. One finger at a time, he peels them off, revealing hands that he keeps hidden again almost immediately. To him, exposing bare skin is an intimate act, reserved for family, physicians, and occasionally those he plans to insult with sincerity. You begin to understand that Victorian gloves are not clothing. They are boundaries. They protect people from germs, from impropriety, from the danger of appearing too human. Across the room, a young woman adjusts her gloves before greeting a suitor. She pulls them tight, smoothing wrinkles with nervous energy. You overhear her maid whispering reminders. Never greet with bare hands unless you intend to send a message. Never remove gloves unless invited. Never shake hands with a man bare unless you wish for the entire county to assume you are engaged. Each rule is wild, yet everyone obeys without question, as though the gloves themselves have become enforcers of a social code too delicate to survive direct contact. You sit in a corner and watch a parade of gloved rituals unfold. A man places his gloved fingertips lightly against his heart to show respect. A woman drops a glove to test a suitor's willingness to retrieve it. Another taps her gloved finger against her fan to signal disapproval. The entire room hums with the soundless language of leather, cotton, silk, and etiquette. You cannot help but realize that you have seen echoes of these motions in your own world. The polite wave, the formal handshake, the ceremonial gesture of taking off your mittens before greeting someone. You thought these habits were modern instincts. Instead, they reach back here to an era where gloves were emotional armor. When the conversation grows lively, someone removes their gloves, which immediately silences the room. It is not hostile or scandalous, but it communicates honesty. Bare hands mean sincerity, vulnerability, a willingness to be known without filters. He speaks more openly, and for a moment everyone leans closer, drawn to the rare intimacy of someone revealing their hands in public. Then, as soon as he finishes, he slips the gloves back on, sealing himself away again with a soft snap. By the time you leave the drawing room, you understand why Victorians cling to gloves like shields. They wear them to hide emotion, to manage impressions, to survive scrutiny. They carry the weight of expectations stitched into every seam. And when you step into the cool night air and pull your gloves off, your fingers tingle, liberated from their temporary prison. You notice, with faint amusement, that even now you hesitate before touching a doorknob. You feel oddly exposed without them. Victorian habits are contagious. You shake your head, flex your fingers, and walk away. But the truth lingers anyway. Once you have worn Victorian gloves, you never quite forget the feeling of armor that fits in the palm of your hand. You find yourself standing at the edge of a Victorian dining room that looks less like a place to eat and more like a ceremonial battlefield staged with knives. The table stretches so far you could send a message to the person at the other end and receive a reply sometime next week. Candles flicker along its length, glowing against polished silverware arranged with the precision of a military formation. You hesitate before stepping inside because you already sense that one wrong movement here could get you quietly exiled from polite society. Victorians do not joke about dinner. They approach it like surgery, diplomacy, and theater all performed at once. You take your seat and instantly realize you have no idea how to sit. You try to imitate the others, sitting straight as lampposts, hands hovering politely at the edges of your plate. A maid places a linen napkin in your lap, and you freeze, terrified of folding it incorrectly. Everyone else seems to fold theirs with a calmness that suggests years of training. You mimic their motions, smoothing the cloth with the exaggerated care of someone handling explosives. No one looks at you directly, but you sense subtle glances, the kind that evaluate your worth based on your posture and your relationship with napkin geometry. The first course arrives, and suddenly you understand why Victorians invented so many table rules. They believed chaos lurked in every spoonful of soup. You lift your spoon and notice the man beside you, tilt his bowl away from him, as though the soup has moral intentions that must be gently redirected. You do the same, praying you do not spill a single drop. Victorians regard soup spills with the same horror modern people reserve for catastrophic technical failures. When you finally taste it, the room watches you with casual indifference, but you know they are still judging, silently scoring you for technique. Then comes the subtle choreography of forks. There are at least 7 of them, each assigned to a task you did not know existed. A long fork, a short fork, a narrow fork, a fork with the personality of a rake. You feel as though you are participating in an exam you never studied for. Your neighbor politely selects the correct utensil for the fish course without hesitation, and you catch a glimpse of his face. Serene and mildly smug, determined not to expose your confusion, you choose a fork at random and hope it is not one intended for something ceremonial like signaling distress. While the servants glide around you, they maintain an expressionless grace. They know every rule, every unspoken cue, every sigh that signals readiness for the next course. You watch as one servant removes crumbs from the tablecloth with a tiny brush, an act so precise it feels spiritual. Victorians loathe crumbs. Crumbs represent disorder, and disorder leads to social collapse, or at least to whispered gossip. You find yourself hyper-aware of every crumb, terrified that your own bread will betray you. Conversation follows its own set of rituals. You speak only to those seated directly beside you, because addressing someone across the table is considered aggressive, as though you are launching your voice like a projectile. You comment on the weather, the flavor of the dish, the state of public gardens, anything safe and neutral. You discover that Victorians mastered the art of talking without revealing a single personal thought. The small smiles, the gentle laughter, the faint nods, all hide a labyrinth of formalities that dictate what can and cannot be said. Your modern instinct to say something casual or honest must be wrestled back into submission. As each course arrives, a subtle tension builds. You realize that modern dinner habits come from this very room. You wait before eating so no one thinks you are uncultured. You chew quietly because noise is a sign of spiritual weakness. You hold your fork in a slightly awkward angle because somewhere in the past, someone insisted that angles reveal character. Even your instinct to place your phone face down before eating echoes Victorian rules of not letting outside distractions spoil the ritual. By the time dessert arrives, you are exhausted, as though you have completed an endurance test involving porcelain and self-control. You watch as everyone places their cutlery at a precise angle on their plates, signaling satisfaction. You follow their lead, aligning yours carefully, even though your hands are trembling from the stress of performing good manners under surveillance. When the dinner finally ends and you stand from the table, your spine cracks softly, your posture having battled gravity for hours. You leave the dining room with a strange awareness, Those tiny habits you practice without thinking, the polite pauses, the careful chewing, the quiet handling of utensils, all trail back to these overlit dining rooms where rules governed every bite. You walk away into the night, air with a full belly and a mind buzzing with revelations. Victorian dinner was never just about food. It was about discipline, image, and the quiet terror of using the wrong fork. You learn the rule before anyone speaks it out loud. It hangs in the air like perfume, faint yet unmistakable. Victorians treat money the way some people treat ghosts. Everyone knows it exists. Everyone feels its presence. But to mention it directly is to invite disaster. You step into a quiet Victorian parlor where velvet drapes swallow the sound of footsteps, and every piece of furniture whispers, restraint. A group of impeccably dressed guests sits in a perfect oval, sipping tea without slurping, breathing without enthusiasm, and absolutely not mentioning the single thing each of them is thinking about, their finances. You listen to a gentleman in a tailored coat describe his estates, without ever once acknowledging their cost. He talks about his horses, his staff, his holiday in Bath, but each sentence performs an elegant dance around the actual numbers. His voice glides gracefully, speaking of comfort and refinement, but never touching the forbidden topic. Victorians believe talking about money reveals desperation, greed, or worse, a lack of good breeding. To them, finances are private, delicate, and potentially explosive. Better to stand on a tightrope blindfolded than ask someone how much they earn. Across the room, a woman adjusts her lace gloves and speaks of her new gown. She describes its color, its stitching, the elegance of its fabric, but not the price. She would sooner confess to a crime than admit how much she paid for it. Her neighbor compliments her style, and she accepts with a quiet nod, careful not to show too much pleasure. Joy, like money, must be moderated. She hints that the dress was made by a very respectable seamstress, which is Victorian code for "I want you to know it is expensive" without forcing me to mention anything vulgar. You try asking someone a question that feels innocent enough. Was the renovation costly? The reaction is immediate. The woman you address stiffens so sharply you wonder if she has been struck by a sudden chill from the afterlife. She gives you a polite smile, but it is the kind of polite smile that conceals panic beneath politeness. She answers with words that mean absolutely nothing. Oh, it was handled in the usual manner. You feel the entire room subtly shift away from you, as though you have revealed yourself to be slightly unstable. Victorians treat financial secrecy as a moral achievement. They believe that the truly wealthy never need to mention wealth. Their homes, their clothing, and their confidence should communicate everything. Talking about money is considered the behavior of shopkeepers, gamblers, or the newly rich, and nothing terrifies a Victorian more than resembling any of those categories. Even children are taught the rule. They may ask why the sky is blue, or why the cat hisses at everyone, but they must never ask how much anything costs. That path leads to ruin. At dinner parties, the rule becomes even stricter. People whisper about travel, weather, flowers, and the state of the nation, but money remains a ghost hovering between them. You watch a gentleman nearly choke on his wine when someone mentions the cost of railway tickets. He composes himself, pretending the comment was an unfortunate slip rather than a breach of etiquette that could stain the entire evening. The subject quickly shifts to something safer, like gardening or the moral decline of youth. You realize this secrecy is not just a rule, it is a shield. Victorians fear comparison. They fear revealing too much or too little. They fear envy, judgment, and the possibility that someone might discover their finances are not quite as grand as their manners suggest. Silence becomes a protective layer, an invisible armor that prevents anyone from seeing where they stand in a hierarchy built on illusion. And then you notice how this rule has followed you into your own world. You still hesitate before discussing salary, savings, or expenses. You worry about seeming flashy, insecure, or impolite. You tell people you are doing fine, even when the truth is more complicated. Without realizing it, you inherited Victorian discomfort, wearing it the way they wore their gloves, not for warmth, but for dignity. As you walk out of the quiet parlor, you feel the lingering echo of that unspoken rule. Money shapes everything, yet remains unmentionable. Victorians built a world where secrecy felt noble, and without meaning to, you carry that invisible ghost with you still, navigating conversations with the same careful grace as those who sat in that velvet room, guarding their finances with polished silence. You learn about Victorian gift giving the moment someone presses a small wrapped parcel into your hands, and then immediately watches your face like a detective waiting for a confession. The room is warm, the wallpaper overly floral, and every person present seems far too invested in what is about to happen. You realize in an instant that Victorian gifts are never just objects. They are emotional puzzles, coded messages, and occasionally social grenades disguised in ribbon. You hold the parcel carefully because it feels less like a present and more like a test. Victorians turned gift-giving into an art form of strategic politeness. Every ribbon has meaning, every object carries implication, and every gesture can tip your relationship towards scandal or triumph. You unwrap the gift with a level of caution usually reserved for dangerous animals. Inside, you find a perfectly harmless item, something decorative and expensive enough to signal respect, but not so expensive that it implies anything suspicious. You smile, but the giver studies the exact curvature of your lips, the spark in your eyes, the breath you take before answering. Victorians believe emotional reactions are clues, and they are always searching for evidence of gratitude or offense. You glance around the room and notice an array of gifts exchanged among the guests. Nothing comes without subtext. A gentleman offers a delicate lace handkerchief to a woman he admires, but not enough to be obvious. The lace is intricate, tasteful, and exactly neutral enough to avoid gossip while still promising interest. Another woman gives her hostess a bouquet arranged with such mathematical precision you suspect she measured every stem. Wrong flowers signal disapproval. Right ones communicate devotion. Victorians fear the wrong bouquet the way modern people fear the wrong text message. You witness the subtle terror of receiving a gift that is too intimate. A book of poetry could imply longing. A scented handkerchief might hint at affection. A brooch could be interpreted as a proposal by proxy. A poorly chosen item could practically start a war. The recipient must smile without showing too much pleasure or too little, because imbalance creates tension. The giver, meanwhile, performs a slow, expressionless evaluation, checking whether their gift succeeded in nudging the relationship in the desired direction. You begin to sweat slightly, not because the room is warm, but because the social rules are suffocating. When it is your turn to give a gift, the anxiety deepens. You offer your chosen item, something modest and neutral, hoping it communicates the correct mixture of respect and distance. The recipient accepts it with a measured nod and a soft murmur that could mean approval or disappointment. You cannot tell. Victorians never reveal too much. Their politeness is polished so thoroughly that sincerity becomes nearly invisible. You start to realize why gift-giving remains stressful in your own world. You still overthink whether something is too personal or not personal enough. You still fear choosing something that implies affection where there is none, or indifference where affection is wanted. You still worry about price, meaning, timing, and reaction. These anxieties descend directly from Victorian drawing rooms, where every gift was a negotiation disguised as generosity. In one corner, you witness a man receive a small book. His smile tightens almost imperceptibly. The woman who gave it waits, holding her breath behind a serene facade. You realize she misjudged. The book hints at intellectual intimacy, and she hoped for more than he was ready to offer. It is a tiny misstep, But in Victorian society, tiny missteps can ripple into gossip that lasts for months. You watch her retreat inward, masking the sting with a polite laugh. The moment passes quietly, but not softly. Before leaving, the hostess presents you with a parting gift, a token of appreciation wrapped so neatly you are afraid to open it without ceremonial instructions. You thank her with the carefully composed warmth you have absorbed. Over the evening, she nods, pleased yet attentive, studying your reaction as though it reveals your soul. The room exhales, as though every gift exchanged tonight has been catalogued, interpreted, and judged. As you step outside into the cool air, you realize the tension does not fade. Victorian gift. Giving has followed you home, woven into your hesitation before birthdays, holidays, and gestures of kindness. You still feel a whisper of that old anxiety, wondering whether your gift says too much or too little. Victorians made gift-giving an emotional maze, and centuries later, you are still navigating it, hoping your smile communicates exactly what it should. You follow a narrow hallway lined with portraits that stare at you with exaggerated dignity, each face painted with the confidence of someone who believes scandals happen only to other families. The air is thick, quiet, and heavily perfumed, as if the walls themselves have absorbed centuries of whispered secrets. You are about to witness something astonishing. Victorians are inventing the modern idea of privacy, not mastering it or enjoying it, merely inventing it like an experiment no one fully trusts. The moment someone tries to use it, the entire household behaves as if they have committed a crime. You watch a young woman slip into a small sitting room and close the door gently behind her, a perfectly normal action in your world. But here, the effect is volcanic. A maid passing by freezes. Another runs to fetch the housekeeper. Someone upstairs gasps loudly enough to rattle the banister. Closing a door alone signals you want time to yourself, which Victorians interpret as deeply suspicious. Privacy is new to them, like a mysterious tonic advertised to cure everything but understood by no one. They believe any desire to be alone must mask an emotional turmoil or a moral collapse. The housekeeper approaches the closed door with the caution one might use when approaching a dangerous animal. She knocks softly, asks if everything is all right, and presses her ear to the wood as though silence itself is incriminating. When the woman inside assures her she is fine, the housekeeper does not look relieved. She looks concerned that she was not told the entire truth. In the Victorian mind, the need for privacy implies the existence of something intense, a letter, a lover, a thought, something that must be contained lest it leak into the public air and stain the family's respectability. You wander into a parlor where a gentleman writes a letter behind a partially closed screen. The guests treat this small barrier as though it is scandalous architecture. They whisper, speculating with mathematical precision. He must be settling debts. He must be arranging travel. He must be writing something heartfelt. The screen does nothing to protect him. Instead, it draws more attention. Victorians crave privacy, in theory, yet panic when anyone claims it in practice. It is as though they invented the curtain, but believe anyone who uses it is hiding contraband emotions. A young man tries to enjoy a moment alone by the window, pretending to read a book. Within seconds, two relatives hover behind him, watching with the discreet intensity of prison wardens. They pretend to admire the view but keep darting glances at his expression, searching for signs of romantic distress or political rebellion. In this society, solitude is not restorative, it is suspicious. If you are not actively participating in polite conversation, you must be recovering from something dramatic or plotting, something dangerous. You take a walk outside, finding a small garden tucked behind the house. A woman stands there alone, breathing quietly, savoring a moment of isolation. Her maid stands 10 feet away, watching like a lifeguard, waiting for trouble. Even in the open air, privacy is treated as a fragile experiment that might backfire. Victorians have designed entire estates with nooks for quiet thought, yet they do not trust the people who use them. The contradiction is almost impressive. Inside again, you overhear someone complain that her husband locked his study door for a full hour. The guests react with the kind of shock usually reserved for natural disasters. What could he possibly need privacy for? Thinking, writing, existing. The possibilities terrify them. They exchange theories, each more dramatic than the last. Someone speculates he is reading a forbidden novel. Another wonders whether he is planning to rearrange the furniture without permission. Privacy becomes a breeding ground for imaginative fears. And then you realize how deeply this Victorian conflict seeped into your own world. You value privacy, yet sometimes feel irrational guilt using it. You close your door to rest and worry. People might assume you are avoiding them. You send someone a message and feel strange if you do not explain why. You take quiet moments but still carry the remnants of Victorian panic that silence needs justification. Their uncertainty clings to you like forgotten dust. By the time you leave the house, the young woman from earlier emerges from her quiet room, calm and refreshed. The household studies her as if she has returned from exile. They ask gentle questions, lace them with concern, and nod in relief when she answers lightly. They do not understand that she simply wanted a moment to breathe. In Victorian London, privacy is treasured in theory, feared in practice, and rarely granted without a flurry of unnecessary worry. You step through the door into the cool night air and feel something soften, the freedom to close a door without explanation, the freedom to be alone without suspicion. It is a luxury the Victorians invented, then immediately distrusted, and one you carry with you, shaped by their lingering confusion. You are shown to a Victorian guest room long before you understand the weight of what you are seeing. The maid pulls back the door with a proud little flourish, as though she is unveiling a royal exhibit. And suddenly, you are staring at a bedroom that has never truly been lived in. Everything inside is immaculate, untouched, preserved like a museum dedicated to the admiration of strangers. The bed is made so tightly the blankets might be hiding secret blueprints. The pitcher of water sits on its tray like it is posing for a portrait. Not a wrinkle, not a speck of dust, not a hint that any human with normal needs has ever dared cross its threshold. Victorians adore this room. They revere it. It represents generosity, preparedness, and moral excellence. To have a guest room means you are civilized enough to offer sanctuary, even if the sanctuary feels more ceremonial than comfortable. You sit gingerly on the edge of the bed, half expecting someone to barge in and remind you this room is for display, not for actual human resting. The mattress is stiff, almost rigid, and the pillow feels like a decorative object that resents being compressed. You begin to wonder whether any Victorian guest has ever slept here without fearing they might wrinkle something important. Downstairs, the household prepares for your stay with the seriousness of officials handling a diplomatic visit. The mistress of the house insists the guest room must always be ready, because one never knows when unexpected company might arrive. You stare at the perfectly arranged objects on the vanity and realize that this room is less about accommodating a traveler and more about maintaining a reputation. A Victorian host believes the state of the guest room reflects the state of their soul. A wrinkle in the bedsheet suggests moral laxity. A dusty corner hints at chaos. A chipped soap dish borders on depravity. You walk around the room, touching nothing, because touching anything feels like a breach of contract. The curtains, embroidered with patterns no one dares examine up close, hang stiffly as though they have been trained to behave. A small writing desk sits in the corner, its surface spotless and intimidating. The ink bottle is full, the quill perfectly sharp. Everything waits for some ideal guest who will never exist, someone graceful and light enough to use these objects without disturbing the room's fragile equilibrium. Later, when someone knocks politely to ask if you need anything, you learn that Victorian hosts experience tremendous anxiety about their guests They check in obsessively, not out of concern for comfort, but out of fear that something might be out of place. And if something is out of place, they will blame themselves for failing in their duty as protectors of propriety. Their hospitality is not warm so much as vigilant. You hear a woman downstairs whisper to her husband that she hopes the soaps in the guest room were cut evenly. This is not a joke. In her mind, uneven soap signals disorder. Disorder leads to gossip. Gossip leads to ruin. You begin to understand how the guest room became a shrine to expectations rather than a refuge. The longer you stay in the room, the more you feel the pressure too. You fold your clothing extra neatly. You hesitate before sitting on the chair because it seems designed more for admiration than bodily weight. You find yourself adjusting the curtains slightly, then adjusting them back when you realize the slightest change might give the impression you disrespected Victorian symmetry. Then you notice something familiar. Modern hosts do this too. You clean obsessively before visitors arrive, even friends, who would not mind a stray sock. You place fresh towels in the bathroom. You create a small display of toiletries, as though preparing for an inspection. You worry about crumbs, fingerprints, odd smells, and furniture alignment. You want guests to feel comfortable, but you also want them to believe. You live in a state of serene order. You have inherited the Victorian belief that hosting is a performance, and the guest room is the stage. As night approaches, you lie in the bed, listening to the quiet tension of a house that cares too much. You feel like an actor trapped in a scene from a play about hospitality. And as you fall asleep, you realize that the Victorian guest room never truly vanished. It simply evolved. It follows you in your instinct to hide clutter when someone visits, in the compulsion to apologize for imagined flaws, in the pressure to offer perfection rather than authenticity. The guest room is more than a space. It is an expectation that lingers across centuries, whispering that welcoming someone means proving yourself, even when all they wanted was a place to rest. You hear it before you see it. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoing from the parlor, the kind of sound a nervous clock might make if it suddenly grew fingers. You step closer and discover a Victorian woman embroidering with the intensity of someone performing life-saving surgery on a tablecloth. Her hands move in tiny, rapid motions, never pausing for more than a breath. The moment she senses your presence, she straightens her spine and speeds up, as though God himself keeps score of her productivity. You realize quickly that in this era, hands are never supposed to be still. Still hands imply still minds, and still minds invite trouble. A gentleman lounged nearby, rises the instant he notices you, pretending he was not resting at all. He picks up a newspaper with the dramatic urgency of a man rescuing himself from the sin of idleness. Victorians believe idle hands undermine moral structure. If your hands are not engaged in respectable work, then what, exactly, are they planning? Mischief, clearly. Temptation, improper hobbies, thoughts that drift too far from the rigid boundaries of what society approves. They imagine a nation collapsing the moment its citizens sit quietly with their own thoughts. You sit in a chair for a moment, thinking perhaps no one will. Notice if you simply exist without purpose. But within seconds, a maid rushes over to ask if you require something to do, something to mend, something to polish, something to read. She offers you needlework with the same urgency someone today might offer a flotation device. Her eyes reflect the deeply ingrained fear that a person with nothing in their hands might spontaneously decay into vice. Throughout the house, you see the same pattern. Men polishing pocket watches that do not need polishing, women darning stockings that are already perfect, children practicing handwriting as though the alphabet is a fragile creature needing constant reinforcement. Even the servants, who have endless real work, create extra tasks just to avoid suspicion. A footman repeatedly straightens a rug until it appears ironed into the floor. Another dusts a shelf that gleams so brightly it could blind. someone at the wrong angle. You step outside into the garden and meet a gardener who prunes a hedge that is already shaped like a symmetrical masterpiece. He trims a fraction of an inch from one leaf, frowns, and trims again. To pause would suggest he is comfortable. Victorians fear comfort almost, as much as they fear chaos. They believe that industriousness keeps the soul aligned, and that laziness invites moral ruin. Work is not just work here. It is a public declaration of virtue. You notice how this mindset seeped into your own world. You still feel guilty resting in the middle of the day. You still apologize before relaxing, as if comfort must be earned through suffering. You still brag about being busy even when the busyness is exhausting and aimless. Some part of you carries the old Victorian anxiety that productivity equates to worth, and worth must always be proven. Back, inside, you watch a group of women sew in synchronized silence, their needles rising and falling like a disciplined army. One pauses to sip tea, but her hand twitches toward the embroidery even as the cup touches her lips. You sense that she cannot remember the last time she allowed herself to stop moving. She glances around to ensure no one misreads her momentary stillness, then resumes stitching with renewed urgency. Her entire identity seems woven into that fabric, each thread a tiny gesture to maintain order, propriety, and the illusion of constant purpose. A young man enters the room, carrying a stack of letters. He looks exhausted, the kind of exhaustion born from performing productivity rather than achieving it. He sets the letters down, then immediately picks them up again, because setting them down with nothing to replace them would risk appearing idle. He sorts them, though they appear already sorted. When he leaves, he carries them with the solemnity of someone carrying his own reputation. The longer you observe, the more it becomes clear that this relentless motion hides fear. Fear of judgment, fear of stagnation, fear of revealing longing for something beyond rules and expectations. Idleness to a Victorian is not rest, it is vulnerability, a moment in which the mask slips, revealing a person behind the performance. As the sun fades, the house grows quieter, but the hands around you do not. Even in dim candlelight, they continue their work, chasing an ideal of virtue stitched into every chore. You find yourself tapping your fingers, tracing the edge of your sleeve, performing tiny movements just to blend in. It is contagious, this fear of stillness. When you finally retreat from the house, stepping into cool night air, your hands relax for the first time in hours. You flex your fingers, feeling tension drain away, and yet a strange thought lingers. Even now, even in your own century, a part of you still believes that stillness must be justified. The Victorians planted that instinct deep, teaching generations that busy hands keep trouble away. You breathe deeply, letting the quiet settle without fear, and walk on, carrying the echo of their restless fingers behind you. You wake in a Victorian household just as dawn drags its pale light across the windows, and before you can stretch or yawn, the day has already begun without you. Footsteps echo in the corridor, soft but purposeful, as though the house itself rises with sharper discipline than any human inside it. When you open your eyes, you find a maid quietly laying out clothing, with the solemnity of someone arranging relics for a sacred ceremony. Morning here is not a gentle beginning. It is a ritual, rehearsed daily, expected daily, judged daily. You sit up, and the maid averts her eyes because Victorians believe modesty must begin at sunrise. She hands you a bowl of water that is somehow both too cold and too small. Washing your face becomes a performance of grace, each splash measured, each gesture polite. Victorians fear disorder in the morning. To them, how you greet the day reflects how you will handle every moral test ahead. If you start sloppy, your whole life might fall apart by noon. You dress under watchful silence. The clothing itself is a puzzle, layers designed not for comfort, but for the display of self-control. You tie, fasten, button, smooth, and straighten, all while feeling the weight of expectation settle onto your shoulders like an extra garment. By the time you are fully dressed, you already feel oddly tired, as though you have completed a series of symbolic tasks meant to purify the soul before breakfast. Downstairs, you find the household deep into their routines. A gentleman sits reading the newspaper with the posture of someone awaiting royal inspection. The paper trembles slightly in his hands because he must appear calm, even if the news inside describes some crisis involving trains, tariffs, or a distant colony. A woman pours tea with quiet devotion, making sure each motion is elegant enough to be recorded in memory. She lifts the pot, tilts it slowly, then returns it to the tray with a tiny exhale she probably does not realize she lets slip every morning. Victorians treat mornings as moral checkpoints. They believe discipline at dawn creates virtue by dusk. Breakfast conversation remains gentle, predictable, and thoroughly harmless, because mornings are not the time for ideas that could burst into debate. Everyone speaks with the softness of people afraid of waking a sleeping giant. Even the children behave like miniature monks, eating their porridge in near silence while sneaking glances at the adults to mimic whatever calm authority they display. You notice a young woman quietly, adjusting her hairpins every few minutes, as though they might betray her if she leaves them unsupervised. A man checks his pocket watch 3 times, even though the time has not changed. Another taps his spoon lightly against the edge of his cup, not from impatience, but from the lingering belief that fidgeting counts as movement, and movement counts as preparedness. Everyone is busy completing tasks that seem small but carry enormous weight in their minds. You begin to understand that Victorian mornings are not about comfort. They are about control. They are about proving that you can greet the world with dignity before the world has a chance to test you. You realize why this mindset survived. You still judge yourself by how your morning begins. If you oversleep, guilt follows you for hours. If you skip breakfast, you feel destabilized. If you do not follow some kind of routine, you worry the rest of the day will unravel. Modern advice about morning productivity suddenly makes sense. Wake early, make your bed, start strong. These ideas are echoes of Victorian fears, softened by time but still powerful. Without realizing it, you inherited the belief that mornings are moral, auditions, and each task you complete before the sun rises proves something about your character. After breakfast, the household disperses with the precise timing of a military operation. The servants hurry to their duties. The men go to their workplaces or studies. The women begin their domestic routines with quiet purpose. Everyone has a script, a rhythm, a place to be. You try lingering for a moment, sipping your tea slowly, savoring rest. Immediately you catch a few confused glances. Rest is suspicious before midday. It disrupts the choreography. Finally, you slip outside, away from the rustling fabrics and clinking china, into morning air that feels less judgmental. You breathe deeply. Your shoulders relax, yet you cannot forget the weight of those rituals pressing gently at the back of your mind. You still feel the urge to fix your posture, to quicken your pace, to appear ready for whatever comes next. Victorian mornings shaped you more than you realized. The routines you hold on to, the guilt you feel when breaking them, the pressure to start the day correctly, all trace back to these households where dawn meant discipline and discipline meant virtue. You walk forward, letting the sunlight warm your face, carrying with you both the freedom of your own time and the faint echo of theirs. You enter a Victorian drawing room and immediately feel the air tighten, as if the wallpaper itself has been instructed not to show emotion. People sit in tidy clusters, sipping tea with facial expressions so carefully composed they look like portraits pretending to be alive. No one laughs loudly, no one frowns openly, no one sighs with anything above the softness of a prayer. Victorians fear emotional displays the way others fear house fires. The slightest spark could spread, igniting feelings strong enough to disrupt the delicate machinery of their social order. A woman receives a letter and goes pale, the kind of pale that suggests the contents are deeply distressing. Instead of reacting like a human being, she clenches her jaw and folds the letter slowly, smoothing its edges as though smoothing her own panic. Her friend notices, but instead of asking directly, she tilts her head a fraction of an inch, a microscopic gesture that serves as a Victorian version of "Are you all right?" The woman returns an equally tiny nod. The conversation continues as if nothing happened, though you can feel the tension humming under the surface like a trapped violin string. In the corner, a gentleman listens to another guest recount a minor inconvenience involving rain and a carriage. His eyes widen slightly, then drop back into neutrality so quickly you wonder if you imagined it. A Victorian must not express annoyance, frustration, or delight too openly. Strong feelings are considered unpredictable, and unpredictability threatens the entire fragile ecosystem of manners. Even joy must be rationed. Too much enthusiasm, and the room would look at you as if you have decided to juggle flaming objects over the hostess's best rug. Someone spills a bit of tea on the tablecloth. In any other century, this would be an inconvenience. Here it becomes a moral emergency. The hostess freezes, her smile sharpening with controlled politeness. You watch her hands stiffen as she reaches for a napkin, blotting the spill with the calm precision of someone suppressing a scream. Everyone pretends they do not see the horror unfolding, because acknowledging it would require acknowledging the burst of emotion behind her eyes. You start to understand why Victorians fear feelings. Emotions cannot be folded, swept, or polished. They do not obey etiquette. They appear without permission and linger without apology. Victorians prefer the safety of polite silence, believing that if everyone conceals their inner storms, society will run smoothly. The irony is that the concealment creates its own pressure. You see it in the stiff shoulders, the tight smiles, the trembling teacups. Every person in the room is a sealed container, shaken but determined not to spill. A young man stands by the fireplace, staring at the floor with a heaviness that needs no words. Something troubles him deeply. But when an older relative approaches, he straightens instantly, pasting on a polite half-smile. He insists he is fine in a tone so controlled it becomes suspicious. But Victorians do not challenge this. They accept the lie with gratitude because the truth would be too disruptive. Real emotions are messy. Messiness requires acknowledgement. Acknowledgement leads to discussion, and discussion might lead to honesty, which terrifies them most of all. You realize how much of this survives today. You still tell people you are fine when you are not. You still smile politely when you want to cry or shout. You still apologize for your feelings, as though emotion is an inconvenience rather than a natural part of being alive. You hide sadness behind humor, hide exhaustion behind small talk, hide frustration behind soft, practiced phrases. You have inherited the Victorian belief that emotions must be dressed neatly before they are allowed into public. As the evening wears on, the room grows heavier with unspoken words. A woman laughs too loudly at a harmless joke, and the laughter is so sudden and genuine that the room falls into shocked silence. She covers her mouth instantly, horrified by her own moment of sincere joy. She apologizes in a whisper, even though the laughter was beautiful. The others nod politely, grateful the emotional breach has closed. When you finally step outside, the cool night air hits you like freedom. You inhale deeply, letting your shoulders drop from the posture of politeness they unconsciously adopted. And yet, as you walk away, you sense the Victorian shadow still following you. The instinct to swallow feelings, the pressure to appear composed, the fear of seeming vulnerable. These habits linger quietly, woven into your everyday life. Reminders of a world where emotions were treated like dangerous secrets no one dared reveal. You sit at a small Victorian writing desk, the kind with spindly legs and drawers that open only if you charm them correctly, and you are handed a sheet of thick cream paper that smells faintly of lavender and obligation. The maid places a quill beside you with the solemnity of someone delivering a court summons. You are told it is time to write a thank you note. Not eventually, not when inspiration arrives. Now, immediately. Victorians do not let gratitude breathe. They trap it, fold it, seal it in wax, and dispatch it by afternoon post. You look around and realize the entire house is engaged in this ritual. A woman at the far end of the room writes so meticulously her handwriting resembles decorative architecture. A gentleman sits upright, composing a note with the expression of a man negotiating a treaty. Even a child is writing one, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration because she has received a small pastry from a neighbor and must now repay the kindness with a written acknowledgement that looks like it belongs in a museum. Victorians believe thank you notes are not optional. They are the very glue that holds society together. Gratitude, when spoken aloud, evaporates too quickly. Gratitude written on paper becomes permanent, traceable, and undeniable. It tells the world that you understand your place in the social web. It confirms that you are civilized, respectful, attentive to the delicate ballet of giving and receiving. A poorly crafted note can tarnish your reputation. A beautifully crafted one can elevate it. You dip the quill into ink with careful hesitation, terrified that a single blot will signal moral failure. Victorians think sloppy handwriting reflects sloppy character. You write the opening line and instantly second-guess every stroke. Does this sound grateful enough? Too grateful? Not grateful enough? Should you compliment the gift itself? Should you compliment the kindness behind the gift? Should you praise the weather as well? Just in case. You begin to sweat, the kind of sweat reserved for exams, job interviews, and unexpected visitors. Across the room, someone sighs deeply, which in Victorian terms means emotional collapse. She has rewritten her thank you note 3 times because each version either sounded insincere or dangerously enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is risky. Thank you. Notes must contain gratitude, but in controlled doses, like medicine that cures only if taken precisely. Anything too warm suggests desperation. Anything too cold suggests ingratitude. Victorians treat these letters like riddles carved into paper. You finally finish your note, sealing it with wax. You expect relief, but instead, you feel a weight settle onto your shoulders. You know instinctively that this one note is part of a larger cycle. You will write more, many more. Victorians live in a constant exchange of favors and acknowledgments. Each gift triggers a note. Each invitation triggers a note. Even the note itself may trigger a response note acknowledging the thank you note. It is gratitude echoing through a labyrinth, impossible to escape once you enter. You watch as servants collect the letters, stacking them neatly for delivery. They understand the stakes. A late thank you note can spark suspicion, whispered judgment, or awkward distance. A forgotten one can fracture a friendship entirely. Victorians maintain relationships through these elaborate paper bridges, terrified of the social collapse that might occur if someone fails to respond in the correct time frame. And then you recognize the familiar shadow this ritual casts into your own life. You still write thank you notes after holidays, weddings, small gifts, or kindnesses, even when you know the recipient will read them once and tuck them away forever. You still feel guilty when you forget. You still agonize over wording, timing, and sincerity. You still believe that a written acknowledgement proves something spoken cannot. The logic for all this faded long ago, but the instinct remains. Stubborn as an old melody, you hum without remembering where you learned it. As the Victorian household moves on with its afternoon, you glance at your sealed note, lying among many others, all shaped by fear, politeness, and the desire to be seen as gracious. The ritual is strange, yet oddly comforting. It forces you to pause, to reflect, to express appreciation even when nerves twist every letter. When you step outside into the cool London air, you feel a mixture of relief and lingering pressure. You know that centuries later, Long after quills gave way to pens and pens to keyboards, the expectation still trails behind you. Write the note, send the message, prove your gratitude. The Victorians may have invented the ritual, but you are still living in its quiet, paper-bound aftermath. You enter a Victorian home draped so heavily in black fabric, it looks as though night has moved, indoors to settle permanently. The air feels dense, softened by layers of cloth hung over mirrors, portraits, and windows. Even the sunlight seems afraid to intrude without dressing appropriately. A maid ushers you inside with quiet stiffness, her clothing dark from collar to hem, her expression disciplined into solemn neutrality. Victorians do not treat mourning as an emotional state. They treat it as a full-time occupation, governed by rules strict enough to require their own manual. You follow the family into a parlor where every object has been subdued. The flowers are subdued. The voices are subdued. Even the teacups look as if they feel guilty for existing. No one smiles. No one speaks above a whisper. No one breathes too deeply, as if oxygen itself might disrespect the atmosphere. A widow sits near the fireplace, wrapped in layers of black crepe so severe she seems carved from shadow. Her veil hides her face completely, not because she cannot bear to be seen, but because Victorian etiquette insists that grief must be worn like armor. You watch her hands move slowly, each gesture deliberate. She is not allowed to attend social gatherings. She is not allowed to wear color. She is not allowed to laugh, even accidentally. Her mourning period stretches into years. Victorians believe that grief must be displayed publicly and exhaustively, or else it is not legitimate. Her silence is expected. Her sorrow is required. Her clothing is a message for the world. Do not approach. Do not inquire. Do not disturb the sanctity of loss. Across the room, a man adjusts his black armband, a sign that he, too, is performing his grief. He speaks quietly about funeral arrangements without ever mentioning his own emotions. Victorians fear emotional expression even in mourning, so grief must be channeled into rituals. They catalog mourning phases, prescribe clothing rules, and assign specific time frames for sorrow. Nothing is left to chance. Even heartache is scheduled. You notice how the guests maintain strict posture, as if slouching might dishonor the thighs. Deceased. They complement the quality of the black fabric, the elegance of the arrangements, the appropriate solemnity of the gathering. It feels surreal. But for Victorians, etiquette shapes every stage of life, including the end of it. Grief is not something to feel. It is something to perform correctly. A young woman approaches a table where small mourning jewelry rests on display. Each piece contains a lock of the deceased's hair woven into impossibly intricate patterns. She touches one gently, almost reverently. Victorians believe that mourning requires tangible proof. Hair, portraits, pressed flowers from the funeral. Physical reminders that grief does not fade even when memory tries to soften. And yet beneath all these rituals you sense something raw, something human trying to break through the polished surface. A quiet tremble in someone's hand as they set down a teacup, a blink that lasts slightly too long, a breath that shivers at the edges. They follow the rules because they must, but the grief still pulses under the fabric. You begin to notice the echoes of this in your own world. You still dress in dark colors at funerals. You still speak softly. You still bring flowers that symbolize respect. You still hesitate before showing any emotion too openly, unsure whether it is appropriate. You send condolences in careful phrases, hoping they sound thoughtful and not intrusive. You stand close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to avoid overwhelming someone. These habits are Victorian shadows. They taught the world that mourning must be orderly, and centuries later, you still feel the pressure to grieve politely. Later, the family walks to the cemetery in a slow procession that feels rehearsed. The path is straight, the pace measured, the silence thick. You join them, feeling the weight of footsteps matching yours. At the graveside, No one breaks down, though many want to. They lower the coffin with quiet dignity, as though sorrow must be gentle to be proper. When it ends, people disperse like smoke, still whispering, still careful, still heavy with rules. You leave the cemetery feeling a strange mix of admiration for their discipline and sadness for the emotions they are forbidden to reveal. Victorian mourning lingers in you as you step away. The rituals molded the world's expectations of grief. The color you wear, the tone you use, the instinct to silence yourself. Their rules cling like the faint scent of old perfume, subtle yet unmistakable. You breathe deeply, allowing the cool air to wash over you, and walk forward, carrying both the weight of what you witnessed and the quiet truth that grief, no matter how carefully managed, always finds its way through. You step into a Victorian street and immediately feel the eyes, not on your face, not on your clothing, not even on your posture. They go straight to your shoes. Every passerby seems to glance down with the reflexes of trained inspectors, evaluating the state of your footwear with alarming seriousness. You suddenly feel as though you are walking on tiny stages strapped to your feet. Victorians do not merely notice shoes. They judge them, decode them, categorize them with the accuracy of naturalists studying rare insects. A clean shoe means you are respectable. A dusty one means your soul might be unraveling. You watch a gentleman stroll confidently down the cobblestones, his boots gleaming so brightly they reflect distorted versions of the buildings around him. He steps with purpose, avoiding puddles the way someone avoids scandal. A child accidentally splashes a drop of mud onto his heel, and the man freezes as though struck by unexpected tragedy. He turns sharply, lifts his foot, and examines it with a slow, horrified breath. The child's mother apologizes frantically, bowing her head as if the infraction is equivalent to assault. The gentleman forces a polite smile, but his eyes flicker with quiet panic. That speck of mud has altered his entire morning. You soon realize that Victorian shoes are not functional objects. They are social statements, badges of discipline, announcements of self-control. Footwear reflects how carefully you move through the world. A spotless shoe proves your moral steadiness. A scuffed one suggests recklessness. A dusty one signals complete social disintegration. Victorians believe that if a person lets their shoes fall into disorder, the rest of their life cannot, to be far behind. You find this amusing at first, until you notice how many people truly believe it. At a nearby shop, a man polishes shoes with the devotion of a sculptor carving marble. He works quickly, expertly, his hands moving in small circles that transform dull leather into shining declarations of virtue. Customers line up with the urgency of people seeking redemption. They whisper about social calls, business meetings, courtships, each convinced their success depends partly on the condition of their footwear. You hear one man mutter that he will not be seen by his future in-laws unless his shoes shine well enough to impress their family lineage. The absurdity settles on you like dust you are suddenly afraid to accumulate. You step into a drawing room later, and the hostess's eyes drop automatically to your shoes before greeting you. She smiles warmly, only after confirming you have not tracked in grime. A muddy footprint on her carpet would require not only a frantic cleaning, but also emotional recovery. Guests discuss the weather, the softness of the carpet, and the quality of someone's boots, as though all three topics are equally dignified. Someone compliments your shoes, and you respond with exaggerated composure, as though you personally birthed them into existence through good character. Outside again, you watch a young woman step around a muddy patch so wide she practically takes a scenic detour around it. She glances behind her to ensure no one saw her. Moment of hesitation. Clean shoes do not simply happen. They are earned through vigilance, strategy, and occasionally acrobatics. You follow her path and realize that modern habits echo this Victorian mindset. You still wipe your shoes before entering homes. You still clean scuffs without thinking. You still feel a strange embarrassment when your shoes are dirty in public. A coach arrives, and the footman jumps down immediately to inspect the ground for mud before the passenger steps out. He clears invisible debris with a flourish, ensuring the path is worthy. The passenger emerges with perfect footwear, confident and proud, unaware or unconcerned about the footman's interpretive dance of cleanliness. Victorians protect shoes because shoes protect reputations. You begin to understand the anxiety. Later, as twilight settles, you return indoors, your steps heavy from navigating the unspoken rules of the streets. You sit on a bench near the entryway and look down at your own shoes. They have picked up a faint haze of dust, nothing dramatic, but enough to make you feel the eyes of your Victorian surroundings again. You brush them off quickly, almost defensively, telling yourself it is practical, not social, but you feel the pressure anyway. Clean them, restore them, hide any sign of disorder. When you finally leave the Victorian world behind, you catch yourself glancing at your footwear more often than usual. It is almost funny, almost absurd, the idea that shiny shoes could protect someone from judgment. And yet, the instinct lingers. The Victorians built a world where dust meant disgrace, where shoes symbolized self-discipline, and you carry a faint echo of their obsession as you walk onward. Careful now of every step. You step into a Victorian parlor, expecting polite chatter, polished furniture, and the usual tension disguised as good manners. What you do not expect is the instant, full-body freeze that overtakes the room when a footman in the hallway accidentally whistles half a note. It is faint, barely audible, more breath than melody. Yet, everyone reacts as though a spirit has materialized in the wallpaper. A woman gasps into her glove. A gentleman's teacup rattles in its saucer. Someone mutters a prayer. The sound lingers a heartbeat longer, then vanishes, leaving the atmosphere trembling. Victorians despise whistling indoors, with a hatred that feels wildly disproportionate until you learn the reasoning. Whistling, they believe, invites danger. It summons misfortune. It offends household spirits, who absolutely must be treated more gently than the servants. It signals rebellion, carelessness, or the kind of personality that cannot be trusted to fold a napkin properly. In their minds, a person who whistles under a roof is either morally unstable or recklessly cheerful, both of which are unacceptable. You watch the hostess sweep into the hall like a storm wrapped in satin. She scolds the footman in a whisper so sharp it could cut glass. He bows repeatedly, mortified, clutching his hands behind his back as if restraining any further musical impulses. The guests pretend not to listen, but every ear is tuned to the drama. When the hostess returns, she forces a smile, the brittle kind built entirely from social panic, and assures everyone the incident has been handled. The group exhales in a slow collective release, as though they narrowly avoided catastrophe. You begin to understand that whistling indoors represents more than etiquette. It symbolizes chaos entering a controlled environment. To Victorians, the home is a sanctuary, meticulously managed, scrubbed, polished, and spiritually reinforced. Whistling disrupts the peace. It hints at spontaneity, which threatens predictability. It carries a trace of wildness, a reminder of sailors, taverns, wanderers, and people who do not schedule their emotions around the expectations of society. In a world obsessed with order, even a cheerful tune becomes suspicious. A young man beside you confesses quietly that he enjoys whistling outside, where the wind can dilute his enthusiasm into something less concerning. But indoors, he cannot risk. His mother once claimed that a whistle would call bad luck through the chimney. His aunt insists that it attracts financial misfortune. His grandfather warned him that whistling indoors angers the spirits of the departed, who prefer respectful silence. Whether these warnings contradict one, another does not matter. In Victorian logic, all are somehow simultaneously true. The strangest part is how contagious their fear becomes. When someone across the room shifts in their seat and accidentally makes a faint, airy sound through their teeth, half the guests stiffen again. You find yourself holding your breath, terrified that an exhale might resemble a tune. The absurdity should amuse you. Instead, you start to feel the pressure too, the strange weight of not being the person who breaks the invisible rule. As the evening continues, you notice something even more surprising. You have seen fragments of this fear in your own world. You have been told not to whistle in the house. You have heard people say it brings bad luck. You have sensed discomfort when someone whistles casually in a quiet room, even if you cannot explain why. The superstition lingers faintly, passed down like an heirloom no one remembers receiving. A leftover whisper from an era that believed sound could shift the fate of a household. Later, as you leave the parlor, you test the air with a tiny whistle under your breath, a note so soft it barely exists. The hostess turns sharply, eyes narrowed in, instinctive alarm. Before she realizes it came from outside the doorway. Her relief is immediate and exaggerated, and you cannot help feeling slightly guilty even though no harm has occurred. When you finally step into the cool night, the silence feels safer than it should. You walk down the street and try again, letting a casual tune slip between your teeth. It echoes faintly, harmlessly, without summoning any catastrophe. Yet some quiet part of you still glances over your shoulder, checking the shadows, making sure the spirits or superstitions of the Victorian household did not follow. That is the secret of their fear. It slips into you quietly, just like a whistle, and even when logic returns, the instinct remains. You walk into a Victorian drawing room, expecting polite chatter and subdued warmth, but the moment someone offers a compliment, the entire atmosphere fractures like porcelain under a hammer. A woman smiles gently at another guest and says she admires her gown. Simple enough, harmless, except it lands in the room like a thunderclap. The recipient freezes mid-step, eyes wide, as if she has just been handed dynamite wrapped in ribbon. Her fingers twitch toward her skirt, smoothing imaginary wrinkles, her expression rotating through surprise, suspicion, embarrassment, and mild panic. She finally manages a quiet, painfully modest reply. "Oh, it is nothing, just something old. The gown is clearly new. Everyone knows it." But sincerity is dangerous. Victorians distrust compliments because they fear unfiltered emotion. A genuine compliment implies real feeling. Real feeling implies unpredictability. They prefer flattery so restrained it barely qualifies as language. A polite observation, a mild acknowledgement, something safe, polished, nearly meaningless. You watch a gentleman praise another man's waistcoat with a tone so flat you are not entirely sure whether he meant it as approval or warning. The other man nods stiffly, unsure whether he has been honored or subtly insulted. This, apparently, is ideal. Compliments must be ambiguous so no one accidentally reveals admiration, envy, or anything else that might disrupt the delicate balance of social neutrality. You attempt one yourself, telling a woman her hairstyle is lovely. Her expression collapses into crisis. She insists you must be mistaken, that it looks much better on others, that she has no talent for hair, that she would never presume it deserves attention. You try to reassure her, but she waves her hand in frantic dismissal, terrified that accepting praise might make her appear vain. Modesty is their shield, and any crack in it invites judgment. Across the room, a man receives a compliment about his eloquence. He blushes, then coughs, then pretends he did not hear it at all. Accepting praise shows confidence. Confidence invites speculation. Speculation leads to gossip. And gossip is the Victorian apocalypse. So he responds with a vague, non-committal noise, something between a hum and a prayer, before changing the subject to the safety of weather patterns. You notice how compliments travel through the room like secret messages no one wants to claim ownership of. People lob them gently, apologetically, as though afraid they might explode. No one gives direct admiration. Instead, they wrap praise in disclaimers. Your dress is lovely, though I am no judge, of course. The meal is delightful, unless you believe otherwise. What a beautiful bouquet, though perhaps too bright for some tastes. A Victorian compliment is a negotiation. It must praise, without suggesting real emotion. It must flatter without implying desire. It must acknowledge beauty without confessing that beauty matters. And then you realize how deeply this reluctance has survived. You still downplay compliments. You still respond with, "Oh, it's nothing," or "I just got lucky," or "this old thing." You still distrust sincerity when it arrives too plainly. When someone praises you, you feel a flicker of discomfort, as though sincerity is too intimate, too revealing. You inherited the Victorian fear that compliments are not gifts but exposures. Back in the drawing room, someone compliments the hostess's decor. She responds with alarmed humility, claiming the arrangement was thrown together casually, even though it clearly took hours of planning. Her modesty is elaborate, layered like her gown. She bows her head slightly, the gesture so rehearsed it resembles a reflex, not a choice. You watch another pair navigate a compliment disaster. A gentleman tells a woman her singing voice is charming. She gasps, horrified, insisting she is practically tone deaf. He tries to reassure her politely, but each reassurance triggers a fresh wave of denial. They talk in circles, until both look exhausted, trapped in the quicksand of politeness. Compliments here are not easy exchanges. They are elaborate dances where both participants scramble to prove they are not too pleased, not too confident, not too eager to believe something good about themselves. By the time you step outside, your head spins from the strange emotional gymnastics. You inhale the cool air, grateful for its simplicity, yet you catch yourself brushing off an inner compliment about surviving the evening, refusing to praise yourself too openly, as if the Victorian instinct has seeped into your bones. You walk onward knowing the truth. The Victorians did not just fear sincerity, they taught the world to fear it too, leaving you with the lingering habit of responding to praise with caution, modesty, and a quiet hope that no one notices how much you wanted to believe it. You first notice the line, because it seems too straight for a city that is otherwise full of chaos. Carriages rattle, chimneys belch smoke, and vendors yell over one another. But here, at the edge of a narrow London street, stands a perfect row of people, men in stiff collars, women in bonnets, children clutching parcels, all of them arranged with eerie discipline, each person positioned at a distance, measured not by tape, but by collective will. You pause, thinking they must be waiting for something extraordinary, perhaps royal news or a miracle cure. But no, the sign above them simply reads, "Bread." A man in the queue catches you looking. He bristles, his expression conveying a warning as clear as words. Do not disrupt the order. You step back instinctively. Victorians believe queuing is a moral duty, a visible demonstration of patience and restraint. If they stand neatly, they are civilized. If they push forward, they are animals. And the fear of appearing animal is enough to keep an entire street frozen in perfect formation. You try to imagine this level of discipline in your own world, where lines at grocery stores resemble battlefields. Here, though, even small children understand the stakes. A girl tugs on her mother's sleeve and whispers that the boy behind her is too close. The mother nods gravely and adjusts her daughter's placement by an inch, as though repositioning a priceless artifact, order restored. A stern matron stands at the head of the line like a guardian of virtue. Her spine is so straight, you suspect she may be held up by sheer willpower alone. She glances over her shoulder occasionally, not to check the line's length, but to ensure no one has dared inch forward. You feel the pressure radiating from her. One misstep, and you will be exiled from polite society. As more people arrive, the ritual begins. Each newcomer walks to the end of the line, stops, and then performs a brief half bow toward the collective. It is not a bow of gratitude, but an acknowledgement of the social contract. I accept the burden of waiting. I accept my place. It is a strange blend of resignation and pride, as though waiting itself is an accomplishment. You hear a low murmur ripple through the crowd when a young man approaches and hesitates for a moment. He glances at the gap between two women, tempted by the possibility of cutting ahead. The temperature of the entire line drops. The matron inhales sharply. Even the horses pulling a nearby carriage seem to pause, sensing the tension. The young man, feeling 50 Victorian eyes brand his soul, immediately turns crimson and scurries to the back. Peace returns. You realize the line is not just a practical tool. It is a performance. A visible display of moral fiber in a society obsessed with appearing proper. In their minds, queuing teaches humility and fairness. It proves that even the wealthy must wait alongside the poor, at least in theory. A nobleman nearby politely pretends not to notice that his servant is holding his place for him. Victorians adore fairness until it becomes inconvenient. A vendor passes by and tries to offer someone a shortcut. If they buy an extra loaf, he will slip them to the front. The crowd gasps collectively. It feels like witnessing a crime. The vendor's smile evaporates as he realizes he has accidentally attempted to dismantle the foundation of Victorian civilization. He backs away in shame. As the line inches forward, you study the people around you. Some look bored. Others look serene, as though waiting in line is a spiritual practice. A few glance toward the front, with yearning, trying to appear patient while silently calculating how long it will take to reach the bread. And yet, no one complains. Complaining implies impatience. Impatience implies moral weakness. Better to quietly suffer. Then you notice something familiar. The same quiet judgment you feel when someone cuts in line today. The same satisfaction when order is restored. The same fear of appearing rude. You had assumed these instincts were modern courtesy, but here you see their origin. Victorians turned queuing into a virtue so potent it never faded. It sank into everyday behavior until people forgot where it came from. When the line finally reaches its destination, each person accepts their loaf with ceremonious gratitude, as if the act of waiting purified them. By the time your turn comes, you feel oddly proud, as though you have passed a test you did not know you were taking. You leave with warm bread in your hands and the quiet realization that you have just participated in a ritual that still rules your life, disguised now as ordinary politeness. You walk away knowing one thing. The queue is not a line. It is a Victorian monument to patience, self-control, and the uneasy desire to prove you are just as well-mannered as those around you. You feel it the moment you step into the Victorian sitting room, a tension woven into the air like an extra layer of wallpaper. Everyone smiles just a little too gently, speaks just a little too carefully, and holds their emotions as tightly as teacups balanced on fingertips. This is a world where saving face is not a strategy. It is survival. Any crack in composure is an invitation for judgment, gossip, or worse, pity. And Victorians would rather swallow their own tongues than be pitied. A woman sits by the window, posture flawless, expression serene. Only the slight tremor in her jaw hints that something in her day went wrong. You want to ask if she is all right. But before you speak, a gentleman nearby clears his throat softly, as if warning you not to disrupt the delicate illusion. Victorian politeness requires that suffering be hidden under layers of grace. Emotions, if they must exist at all, must remain locked behind bone and lace. A servant drops a tray in the hallway, the crash echoing through the house like a gunshot. The guests collectively flinch, but no one allows their faces to betray anything. They pretend the noise was a harmless breeze rather than a disaster. The hostess smiles a little wider, a brittle smile that makes her cheeks twitch. She assures everyone it is nothing, absolutely nothing. though the color draining from her face suggests she will replay that sound for the next 3 days. In Victorian minds, losing composure is losing control, and losing control is revealing something raw, and rawness is unbecoming. You watch a conversation unfold between two men discussing business matters with the elaborate politeness of diplomats. One is clearly furious about something. The way he grips his walking stick leaves small white marks on his knuckles, but his tone stays smooth, his smile measured, his anger hidden beneath a layer of practiced civility. His opponent mirrors the performance, nodding politely, even as his eyes flash with thinly veiled irritation. Both men would rather let their stomachs knot into anchors than admit to feeling anything. As you stand there, absorbing the quiet strain in the room, you begin to understand the architecture of Victorian politeness. It is not kindness, it is camouflage, a way to maintain dignity, to avoid exposing weakness, to keep personal turmoil tucked under the carpet where no one can trip over it. They believe that if you show too much emotion, you burden others. And burdening others is a crime against civility. The conversation shifts to small talk, the ultimate Victorian escape route. Nothing too personal, nothing too revealing. Weather, travel, neutral anecdotes devoid of emotion. Feelings are dangerous because they spark reactions, and reactions shatter composure. They would rather let silence swallow whatever they truly want to say than risk appearing vulnerable. You recognize the echo of this in your own world. You still say you are fine when you are unraveling. You still pretend annoyance is amusement, sadness is fatigue, frustration is nothing at all. You still mask your feelings because you were taught, subtly and early, that politeness means presenting your best self even when your real self is fraying. The origin of that instinct sits right here, under these Victorian lamps and corsets and forced smiles. Across the room, a young woman receives bad news via a quietly delivered note. Her face goes still, eerily calm. She folds the paper neatly, sets it beside her, and thanks the messenger with perfect courtesy. You can practically feel her heart splintering behind her ribs, but she waits until she is alone to let even a trace of sadness show. Even then, she muffles her sobs into her handkerchief because walls have ears and emotions should not spill into shared spaces. The longer you watch, the more you see how heavy this way of living must be. They hold their emotions like breath, and it is exhausting to never exhale. But they believe this restraint keeps society functioning. If everyone were honest about their feelings, the facade of civility might crack. They built a culture that prizes grace over truth, appearance over authenticity, and you are still living in the aftermath. When you finally step outside, fresh air fills your lungs in a way that feels startlingly liberating. You loosen your shoulders without realizing you had tensed to them. Yet even now, a part of you still worries about seeming too open, too raw, too human. That is the Victorian shadow trailing behind you. The pressure to smile when you want to cry, to stay calm when your heart is thrashing, to smooth your own edges so no one feels uncomfortable. You walk, onward knowing their rules never fully vanished. They simply softened into modern manners, leaving you with the lingering instinct to hide your feelings politely, just like everyone in that quiet, suffocating room. You step into a Victorian hallway where the air feels strangely rehearsed, as if every interaction has been practiced in front of a mirror. A man and woman approach each other from opposite ends of the corridor, and instantly the atmosphere sharpens. Their steps slow, their posture adjusts. Their expressions settle into neutral readiness. You sense you are about to witness a greeting ritual so tightly bound to etiquette it could probably survive a house fire. The man lifts his hat with precision, not too high, not too enthusiastic. A gesture too eager suggests impropriety. A gesture too small suggests insult. He tilts his head in a small arc of acknowledgement, eyes momentarily lowered to prove he is not a threat. The woman responds with a faint dip of her chin, careful to maintain distance. She offers a soft smile that looks like it was ironed into place. The moment hangs between them, balanced on the edge of politeness and anxiety. They exchange a few words, nothing meaningful, but every syllable obeys the rules of propriety. You watch closely, struck by how much choreography hides beneath the simplicity. A man cannot greet a woman too warmly. A woman cannot greet a man too casually. Handshakes are rare unless already familiar. Touch is restricted to. Situations so formalized they could be engraved into stone. Even eye contact follows a script. Too much suggests forwardness. Too little suggests coldness. Every second of the exchange is a negotiation between courtesy and distance. When the man steps aside to let the woman pass, he does so with exaggerated politeness, allowing a wide berth so there can be no misunderstanding. She walks by without turning her head, her steps controlled and quiet, as if the floorboards themselves might judge her. Only when she is several paces away does she allow her shoulders to soften the slightest fraction. You continue through the house and see variations of the ritual everywhere. Two young people greet each other under the watchful eyes of their families. They barely look at one another, exchanging tiny, awkward phrases that carry the weight of entire future possibilities. Their parents monitor every detail, making sure no glance lasts too long. Another pair greets each other with the enthusiasm of close friends, but stops themselves just short of physical contact, as though remembering the rules at the very last second. Their laughter softens, their joy simmering beneath a lid that must stay firmly in place. You begin to understand that Victorian greeting rituals are not just politeness. They are boundaries written into behavior, rules that dictate who may approach whom, how quickly, how warmly, and with what expression. Greetings reveal social rank, gender expectations, and the invisible tension between propriety and human instinct. Even a simple hello can carry consequences if executed incorrectly. And then you see how deeply this legacy persists in your own world, how men worry about seeming too forward when greeting women, how women gauge the safety of a handshake, a hug, or even standing too close, how people still navigate first meetings with caution, reading signals, adjusting tone, keeping invisible lines intact, how something as simple as deciding whether to hug or wave can create an unexpected moment of panic. Victorian boundaries never vanished. They simply became quieter. Back in the drawing room, a woman greets a man she has known for years. There is warmth in her smile, but she reins it in, smoothing it with practiced restraint. He bows slightly, not because he needs to, but because he fears impropriety more than awkwardness. They find comfort in the rules, even when the rules keep them apart. You can sense the relief each feels when the greeting is over, as though they have passed a test without studying. Outside, you watch a couple walk together, keeping enough space between them to let a chaperone stand comfortably, if required. Their steps are synchronized, but their hands remain distinct, never brushing. They lower their voices when people pass, raising them only when alone again. Even affection must acknowledge the social script. By the time you leave Victorian London behind, you feel the residue of these rituals settling in your mind, the instinct to monitor tone, the hesitation before initiating contact, the quiet calculation of boundaries. These habits followed you into the modern world without your noticing, shaping every introduction, every greeting, every moment you stand before someone new. You walk forward, aware now of the ghostly etiquette still whispering at the edges of your interactions, guiding you with rules older than you realized, as gentle and restrictive as a gloved hand resting lightly on your shoulder. You arrive in Victorian London expecting fog, clattering carriages, and the usual chorus of anxious etiquette. What you do not expect is the absolute terror radiating from a man checking his pocket watch as if it holds his eternal fate. He flicks it open, snaps it shut, checks the street clock, and then checks his watch again just in case time has changed without permission. When he sees you watching, he offers a tight, brittle smile, the kind a person makes when they are 1 minute away from disgrace. Victorians treat punctuality as a moral creed. Being late is not a minor inconvenience. It is a public confession of chaos. Arriving on time proves your discipline, your character, and possibly the strength of your soul. You learn this quickly as you watch servants darting through the hallways, adjusting clocks, ensuring every one of them agrees on the hour. If even a single clock drifts, the entire household slips toward moral collapse. One clock wrong, and someone will be late. And if someone is late, Victorian society might burst into flames. A woman prepares for an outing with the intensity of a general assembling troops. She glances at the clock after almost every gesture. Lace gloves on, check. Bonnet tied, check. Parasol folded, check. She glides toward the door, then stops abruptly, realizing she is 2 minutes early. 2 minutes early is acceptable. 3 minutes early is overeager. 1 minute early is appropriate. Too early looks desperate. Too late looks irresponsible. So she stands in the doorway, perfectly still, waiting for the precise moment her departure becomes socially ideal. Her breath sounds like it has been dramatically edited for effect. You accompany her to a small gathering. Everyone arrives at the exact same moment, as though choreographed. Footmen open carriage doors in perfect synchronization. Guests step inside with carefully measured enthusiasm. The hostess greets each person with a smile that indicates she has been ready for exactly 14 minutes and not a second more. If someone had arrived early, she would have panicked. If someone had arrived late, she might have fainted. Inside, you hear the polite hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional chime of pocket watches. Men compare the accuracy of their timepieces the way modern people compare phones. A guest proudly announces that his watch loses only 1 second per day, receiving awed nods. Another confesses his watch drifted by 3 seconds last week. The horror in the room is immediate and theatrical. Someone discreetly suggests he visit a watchmaker before society begins to talk. Even meal times are regimented. Dinner is at a precise hour, and deviating from it is unthinkable. If you show up late, the soup cools. If the soup cools, the kitchen staff fails. If the kitchen staff fails, the hostess looks incompetent. And if the hostess looks incompetent, gossip will spread like wildfire. You glance at the clock on the mantel and feel a creeping sense of pressure even though you have done nothing. Yet, dinner is 20 minutes away and already you feel late. You begin to see how deeply this obsession penetrates their lives. Trains run by timetables so strict that entire cities organize themselves around whistles and steam. Schools begin promptly, shops close promptly, and even leisure occurs on a rigid schedule. There is no room for lingering, wandering, or arriving whenever you please. To be punctual is to be respectable. To be late is to be suspect. Then the realization hits you. You still live under this clock-ruled legacy. You panic when you run behind schedule. You apologize excessively when you arrive a few minutes late. You get restless when others are not on time, tapping your foot or checking your phone with Victorian intensity. You organize your day around numbers on screens, feeling judged by them even though they are emotionless. Your calendar controls you in a way the Victorians would applaud. Back in the Victorian parlor, a man stands abruptly, alarmed by the toll of the hour. He must leave immediately to avoid being late to his next engagement. His departure is swift, rigid, and filled with urgency. Everyone admires his discipline. You follow him outside and watch him board a carriage, already checking his watch again before the wheels start moving. When you finally walk away from Victorian London, a strange awareness lingers. You feel the pressure of time ticking against your skin. You check your own watch, then laugh softly, realizing you are doing exactly what they did. The Victorian obsession with punctuality never disappeared. It simply changed shape, slipping quietly into your modern days, creating the familiar pulse of hurry you carry without question. You wander into a Victorian ballroom, expecting elegance, predictable conversation, and the usual quiet panic disguised as charm. What you do not expect is the constant, buzzing undercurrent of fear. It hangs in the air like perfume, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Everyone is terrified of embarrassment, not mildly concerned, terrified. Their entire bodies seem engineered to prevent even the possibility of an awkward moment. Back straight, hands poised, smiles calibrated to the exact degree of social safety. Every gesture is a small, trembling negotiation with disaster. A gentleman across the room drops his glove. It is a small thing, barely a sound, but the effect is immediate. His eyes widen. The nearest guests inhale sharply. A woman looks away to preserve his dignity. Another man discreetly shifts to block the fallen glove from view, as if shielding a scandal. You watch him bend down to retrieve it with the delicate, deliberate motion of someone diffusing an explosive. When he stands, he pretends nothing happened. Everyone pretends nothing happened. The silence following the incident has the density of stone. Victorians believe embarrassment is catastrophic because it reveals the one thing they cannot control: humanity. They spend their days constructing armor out of poise and knowing exactly where to put their hands at all times. Any crack in that armor might expose a feeling, a mistake, or a moment of unfiltered reality. And reality, to them, is far too dangerous for public consumption. You watch a woman across the room attempt to navigate a conversation while holding a teacup that is far too hot. Her smile does not falter even as her fingers twitch. She refuses to set it down prematurely because that might draw attention. Instead, she lifts it again, blowing softly in a way that looks elegant rather than desperate. She sips it with a calmness that should win awards. Her internal turmoil never reaches the surface. That is the victory she seeks. Nearby, two men debate some trivial topic with the intensity of diplomats preventing war. One accidentally stumbles over a word, a simple mispronunciation, but he corrects himself so swiftly and gracefully you would think he has rehearsed for this exact moment. The other man pretends not to notice, even nodding in exaggerated understanding, both determined to shield each other from humiliation. Victorians practice this mutual protection with a fervor that borders on devotion. At first, the fear seems excessive, but as you observe, you start recognizing it. A woman laughs slightly too loudly and immediately covers her mouth, apologizing for her enthusiasm. A man misjudges the rhythm of a bow and stumbles half an inch too far forward, flushing deeply as though he has committed a crime. A child drops a biscuit and instantly goes rigid, anticipating reprimand. Even the servants move with rehearsed caution, as though their livelihoods depend on maintaining a seamless performance. And then, slowly, you feel the uncomfortable truth settling into you. You know this fear. You know the dread of tripping in public, of saying the wrong thing, of your stomach making an unfortunate noise during a quiet moment. You know how quickly embarrassment becomes something larger, something sticky that clings to memory. You know how people hide mistakes behind jokes, excuses, or silence. The instinct did not vanish with the Victorians. It simply softened into modern expectations. You recall moments where you maintained composure at all costs, when you acted unbothered, when you swallowed emotion, when you forced a smile to hide heat rising in your cheeks. You have inherited their worship of dignity without even realizing it. You still crave the ability to move through the world without missteps, to avoid the spotlight in moments of vulnerability, to stay composed even when everything inside you threatens to spill over. Back in the ballroom, a string quartet pauses between songs. The hush that follows is so fragile you fear even blinking might break it. Someone at the edge of the room sneezes. It is soft, polite, nearly apologetic. Yet every guest freezes for a fraction of a second. The sneezer murmurs a quick, mortified apology. The hostess beams at him with artificial warmth, determined to erase the incident from collective memory. The moment passes only because they force it to. As you leave the ballroom, stepping into the cooler night air, you feel the weight of every held breath, every cautious gesture, every carefully concealed tremor of embarrassment. The Victorians cultivated composure as a form of armor, and you still wear a version of it. You walk onward, knowing that deep inside, a small part of you still fears the drop of a glove, the mispronounced word, the crack in your own veneer. And though the world has changed, the instinct remains, quiet and persistent, guiding your steps just as it guided theirs. You enter a Victorian parlor, expecting a simple cup of tea, something warm and harmless to settle your nerves. But the moment you step inside, you realize you have underestimated the situation entirely. This is not tea. This is ceremony. This is choreography. This is a performance so intricate it could be taught at academies and still leave students trembling. A woman stands at the center of the ritual, surrounded by cups, saucers, spoons, strainers, sugar tongs, and a teapot. So elaborately decorated, it looks capable of judging your moral character. She begins by warming the pot, because apparently a teapot must be pampered before it fulfills its purpose. She swirls hot water inside, then pours it out with a delicacy that suggests even the water has social expectations. She chooses the tea leaves next, lifting the tin with reverence. Not too much, not too little. A measurement that must honor both flavor and propriety. When she pours the boiling water, the room leans in as though witnessing a miracle. Even the clock seems to stop ticking out of respect. Then comes the waiting. The steeping period is treated like an emotional test. Too long and the tea becomes bitter, a reflection on the hostess. Too short and it is weak, which also reflects on the hostess. She stands very still, eyes focused on the pot, calculating time not by instinct but by a deep, ancestral fear of disappointing her guests. It feels like watching someone defuse a bomb. When the tea is finally ready, the real ordeal begins. She must pour without spilling, without splashing, without allowing the stream to waver. A single drop out of place could suggest carelessness. She fills each cup to the exact height of politeness, no more, no less. You glance around and notice the guests watching her hands with the intensity of gamblers waiting for dice to land. Only when she succeeds do they relax, each person performing a tiny, secret sigh of relief. Milk comes next, but not before tea. Milk before tea is barbarism in this household. Sugar follows, placed by sugar tongs, never fingers, because fingers are dangerous. Fingers carry human warmth and therefore scandal. Each guest stirs slowly, quietly, creating a gentle sound that signals refinement. Loud stirring is considered emotional instability. You take your first sip, expecting the earth to shift after all this effort. It tastes like tea, just tea. Ordinary, pleasant, warm. But the Victorians are watching, waiting to gauge your reaction. You must smile, but softly. Praise it, but modestly. Sip again, but not too quickly. Every gesture must be thoughtful, as though drinking tea is equivalent to interpreting sacred scripture. Across the room, someone commits a breach. A man lifts his cup, but forgets to lift the saucer with it. The gasp is immediate. The hostess stiffens. The man pales and corrects himself instantly, but the damage is done. A ripple of polite horror moves through the room. They will never forget this. They might not mention it, but it will be stored in their memories forever, sealed in social amber. You begin to understand why they invented all these rules. Tea is not about tea. Tea is a stage on which they display discipline, virtue, and the ability to follow arbitrary instructions without complaint. It transforms a simple act into a ritual proving you belong. They turned leaves and water into a test of character. And then you realize how much of this ritual survived. You still argue about the right way to make tea. You still feel guilty if the cup clinks too loudly. You still treat mugs with sentimental attachment or unspoken hierarchy. Even people who do not drink tea adopt the structure in other ways, creating small, complicated routines around coffee, hot chocolate, or anything warm enough to hold between trembling hands. Back in the parlor, the conversation finally resumes, soft and orderly now that the tea has passed inspection. But you notice that every guest still glances occasionally at their cup, terrified of mishandling it. Even the children hold their tiny cups with desperate precision, their hands steady from fear alone. When you leave the room, stepping into the hallway, a servant quietly collects the empty cups with the serenity of someone trained for years in the art of not shaking. You walk away feeling oddly humbled. You drank tea, and somehow it felt like surviving an exam. And later, when you hold a cup in your own century, you feel the echo of Victorian eyes watching your hands, judging whether you will spill, sip too loudly, or forget the saucer. Their ritual clings to the simple moment, turning it into something delicate and precise. You lift your cup carefully, almost reverently, realizing the truth. The Victorians did not give you tea. They gave you the instinct to treat ordinary things as sacred, all to avoid a mistake no one wants to witness. You step into a Victorian home and realize, almost immediately, that you have entered a place designed not for comfort, but for judgment. Every piece of furniture, every curtain, every carefully polished surface seems to whisper a reminder that you are being evaluated. The air itself feels curated, as though the house has practiced looking hospitable in the mirror. A maid guides you through the entryway while straightening objects that were already perfectly straight, proving that perfection is not a state here, but an ongoing performance. The parlor is a museum of good intentions and silent stress. Chairs are arranged in a way that suggests conversation, but discourages actual relaxation. Each cushion seems stuffed with the expectation that guests will praise them. A family portrait hangs above the fireplace with expressions so stern you half expect them to climb out of the frame and enforce etiquette laws. The room is warm, but not cozy. Welcoming, but not comforting. It is hospitality painted onto walls, rather than lived in by the people inside them. A hostess enters with a smile so polished it deserves its own chandelier. She invites you to sit on the most uncomfortable chair you have ever encountered. It forces your back into an upright posture that suggests confession more than leisure. Victorians believed that too much comfort made people lazy, so they created rooms where you could be welcomed and mildly punished at the same time. Your hostess gestures toward the ornate decor, a silent request for admiration. You comply because you can feel the weight of her anticipation. Complimenting her home is not about politeness. It is a social obligation. She leads you into another room, a space clearly intended for visitors to marvel at rather than use. A faint scent of lavender clings to the air, deliberately chosen, carefully placed. Fresh flowers adorn the table, arranged with military precision. Every object looks as if it is posing. Even the clock ticks more politely than you thought possible. The hostess moves with the practiced grace of someone who has internalized the belief that hospitality is performance rather than connection. You begin to notice how every detail serves a purpose. The tidy hallway signals organization. The immaculate dining room signals refinement. The guest bedroom, perfectly made and untouched, signals generosity. Victorians created homes that spoke on their behalf, broadcasting virtues they hoped others would notice. A well-kept home reflected well-kept morals. Cleanliness proved discipline. Symmetry proved self-control. Clutter suggested moral weakness. Disorder suggested ruin lurking behind lace curtains. As you walk through the house, you feel the quiet pressure it exerts on everyone who enters. Guests try not to disturb anything, Children whisper. Servants move silently, terrified of breaking the illusion with a misplaced object. Even the family themselves live inside the performance, always aware of how a visitor might interpret a crooked frame or a scuffed floorboard. Hospitality is not about comfort. It is about managing perception. Then you realize how much of this persists. You still clean frantically before guests arrive, even if they are close friends. You still apologize for your home, for a mess they probably did not notice, for things that do not matter but suddenly feel enormous. You still offer drinks and snacks as though failing to do so would reveal something dark about your upbringing. You still curate spaces for visitors, hiding clutter, arranging pillows, lighting candles, pretending your home always looks like this when you know very well it does not. The Victorian instinct survives in the way you host others. You want them to feel cared for, but you also want them to believe you are at your best. You understand now that this impulse is inherited, a lingering echo of a world where hospitality meant proving yourself worthy of social standing. Even your anxiety about unexpected guests traces back to these rooms where everything must be controlled, prepared, perfected. Back in the Victorian dining room, your hostess offers you tea in cups so delicate you hold them like endangered artifacts. She watches your reaction with hopeful anticipation. You smile, because that is what the room demands. Her shoulders relax. She has succeeded. The home has succeeded. Their performance remains intact. When you finally step outside, breathing in fresher air, you feel the subtle pressure loosen. Yet it follows you, a soft reminder that hospitality still carries traces of Victorian performance. You walk on knowing that every time you straighten a pillow before company arrives, you are reenacting a ritual crafted in rooms just like these, where elegance mattered, appearances mattered, and comfort came second to the silent art of being admired. You walk through a Victorian street at dusk, the fog curling around gas lamps like it has memorized the choreography. At first glance, the scene feels contained, sealed within its own century. But as you watch people interact, greet one another, navigate sidewalks, and carry themselves with a mixture of stiffness and performance, you start to notice something unnervingly familiar. These rituals did not stay here. They traveled, they seeped outward, crossing oceans and decades, settling quietly into the bones of modern life. You can feel it in the way each passerby arranges their face into polite neutrality, the way they avoid direct confrontation, the way they hold themselves as if constantly aware they are being observed. A gentleman steps aside to let a woman pass in a narrow lane. He does so with practiced politeness, offering a small nod he probably rehearsed for years. She responds with a faint smile that reveals nothing personal, yet acknowledges his effort. Their gestures are brief, crisp, and deeply controlled. You have seen this exact exchange unfold countless times in your own world, in office, hallways, grocery store aisles, crowded sidewalks. The context changed. The choreography did not. Inside a small tea shop, you observe a table of travelers discussing etiquette manuals as if they are studying maps. They speak of rules that must be upheld, not just in London but in colonies where Victorian influence spreads like ink through water. A proper greeting here, a correct posture there, a way to convert local customs into something that matches British ideals. They speak casually about exporting manners, as though shipping crates filled with teacups and lace, not realizing they are packaging social expectations that will linger long after their empire fades. You stand quietly nearby, sensing the beginning of something larger than any of them understand. As you wander farther into the city, you watch a mother instruct her child in the art of politeness. Do not stare. Do not speak too loudly. Do not interrupt. Say please. Say thank you. Keep your feelings tucked in neatly. Her tone is soft but firm, her instructions precise. You hear echoes of these same lessons in your own upbringing, Those small childhood commands that felt like moral formation disguised as manners. You realize the script has barely changed. Only the accents have. At a dinner gathering, you watch guests exchange compliments with the careful restraint of people handling fragile glass. They avoid directness, soften their opinions, and keep conversations hovering safely above anything that might persist to reveal too much. You recognize this too. The polite laughter too quiet to be real, the meaningless apologies, the careful wording meant to avoid appearing rude, aggressive, or overly familiar. Victorian etiquette traveled far more successfully than Victorian fashion or architecture. It embedded itself in behavior. You begin noticing how this seepage took shape. The British Empire spanned continents, and with it came teachers, administrators, missionaries, merchants, and officials who carried their manners like banners. Politeness became a measure of civility. Civility became a measure of character. Character became a measure of belonging. Entire sections of the world adjusted their social habits, absorbing these expectations not through force but through repetition. A raised eyebrow, a subtle correction, a quiet insistence that the British way was the proper way. And over time, it blended into the cultures around it, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply, but always persistently. Back on the street, you watch a man check his posture in a reflective window, adjusting his coat and shoulders. Another smooths her expression when she notices someone approaching. They shift into their public personas with ease, slipping into the polished restraint Victorians prized so fiercely. You realize that modern professional behavior mirrors this almost exactly, the poised voice. The neutral expression that reveals nothing personal, the way people hide frustration beneath courtesy, because that is the expected language of competence. The ghost of Victorian composure still shapes the room. Even simple gestures carry the imprint. Holding a door, offering a seat, saying "excuse me" with a tone that tries to soften inconvenience. Manners became global because Victorians pinned them as cultural currency, and the world absorbed the idea that politeness equals respect, respect equals civility, and civility equals stability. As you stand in the center of the street, watching carriages roll past and people move with choreographed grace, the full picture becomes clear. Victorian etiquette did not fade. It became the blueprint, a quiet inheritance passed through families, classrooms, workplaces, and social expectations until the rules felt universal rather than historical. You live within their shadow without realizing it, carrying remnants of these rituals into every introduction, every apology, every calculated smile. When you eventually leave the Victorian world, you carry with you the strange awareness that the manners you thought were simply human courtesy are in fact centuries old, exported, polished, globalized. You walk forward knowing that each polite gesture you make is a distant echo of this foggy street where people once believed proper behavior could hold an entire society together. You stand in the quiet aftermath of all the rooms you have walked through, all the rituals you have witnessed, all the Victorian worries that seeped into modern habits without asking permission. The fog of London has thinned behind you, but the echoes of that era cling like the faint smell of old perfume. You feel those rules hovering around you, some still stitched into your instincts, others lingering like dust in corners you keep meaning to clean. For the first time, instead of simply absorbing them, you pause long enough to sort through what you have inherited. You think of the posture rules first, the straight backs, the stiff shoulders, the idea that the shape of your spine reveals the shape of your character. You remember how you still sit up a bit straighter around strangers, how you worry about slouching in photographs, how you fear looking careless even when no one is watching. Victorian voices whisper that poise equals virtue, but standing here, you realize your spine has endured enough from centuries of expectations. You let your shoulders relax, allowing gravity to soften you without shame. It feels like reclaiming something you did not know you lost. Then you think of the greetings, the cautious hellos, the fear of crossing invisible boundaries, the instinct to avoid eye contact until an unspoken signal gives permission. You feel the residue of those rules in the way you sometimes hesitate before hugging someone, or how you worry about seeming too forward or not forward enough. Victorian etiquette wrapped introductions in anxiety, turning simple human contact into a minor test. You breathe slowly and decide you no longer need the entire exam. You keep the kindness, but release the fear. The obsession with punctuality rises next, the ticking clocks, the schedules treated like moral compasses. You remember all the times you rushed, panicked, apologized for lateness, as though confessing a crime. Victorian London taught the world that time is a measure of worth. But standing here, with the fog clearing, you acknowledge that sometimes running late is not failure. It is being human. You do not discard punctuality entirely, but you loosen its grip, letting room exist between the minutes. You reflect on the emotional suppression, the tiny smiles that carried entire storms behind them, the polite nods masking heartbreak, the quiet insistence that real feelings must be hidden to preserve dignity. You see how deeply that remains in you. The instinct to say you are fine when you are not. The pressure to stay calm, composed, tidy in your expressions. You realize that this rule has followed you the longest, shaping countless conversations and silencing countless truths. And this is the rule you release most deliberately. Not all at once, but gently, the way you might unfold a letter you have been afraid to read. You think of the tea rituals, the hospitality performances, the instinct to try to make your home appear perfect whenever someone visits. You have scrubbed counters at midnight, hidden clutter behind doors, apologized for imaginary flaws. Victorian homes taught you that hospitality is theater. But tonight, you understand something else. Hospitality can be warmth instead of performance. Clutter can be life instead of shame. You decide to keep the welcoming spirit and abandon the pressure to choreograph every moment. One by one, each rule steps forward, revealing the version that still exists within you. The fear of embarrassment, the discomfort with compliments, the urge to follow social scripts even when they choke spontaneity. You examine them carefully, not to judge the Victorians, but to understand yourself. Their world needed these rules to keep order, but your world does not in the same way. Some habits you choose to keep because they feel rooted in kindness rather than fear. Please and thank you, holding doors, moving aside on crowded paths, the small, gentle behaviors that make life softer. These remain. They do not bind you. They simply connect you to others. But the rules born from shame, from silence, from the belief that humanity must be tucked neatly out of sight, those you begin to let fall away. You release them like breath you have been holding too long. You feel lighter with each one. As the last traces of Victorian fog fade, you recognize that you are not discarding history. You are choosing how much of it to carry. You walk forward aware of the past, but no longer ruled by it, creating space for your own ways of standing, greeting, feeling, and living. The rules that remain are the ones that help. You move kindly through the world, and the rest dissolve behind you as quietly as footprints in mist.